Chapter 2940. Blackwater Civilization. On an island with a sea of blood floating. A black-robed man, wearing a skull mask, was currently training a secret technique amidst a pile of corpses. In front of his chest was the blood of the 10 strongest experts of the Blackwater Civilization. Under the activation of a secret technique, a blurry remnant mark was extracted from the blood. Only this much. The experts and ancestors of the Blackwater Civilization are too weak. He was none other than the leader of the Skull Unit. Gaition Mo. Gaiton Mo frowned slightly, his eyes filled with disappointment. He then took out a jade bottle. Inside the jade bottle, there were half a bottle of similar remnant marks. Some were extremely blurry, some were clear. He placed the blurry remnant mark into the bottle. Looking at the half bottle of remnant mark, Gaition Mo sighed. I still have a long way to go. This is only half a bottle. It is far from what old ancestor wants. So there is someone else behind Gaition Mo. For so many years, he had led the Skull Unit to kill and plunder in the starry sky. It was not a baseless rumor. The Skull Unit's evil deeds were only on the surface, causing others to think that the Skull Unit was only cruel. But in truth, the Skull Unit's true goal was to extract the unique remnant mark from the bodies of the Wanderers. In the recent era, the Skull Unit had killed countless of living beings and had obtained a portion of the remnant mark, but it was still far from what they wanted. The expert who took away my demon beast, he should not disappoint me, right? Gaition Mo muttered. He was extremely interested in the expert that he had never met before. He estimated that the person who was able to take away all of his demon beasts would at least surpass the ancient saint realm. Although there were many experts in the starry sky, but there were only a few that surpassed the ancient saint realm. Right at that moment, a loud and clear voice came out from his soul. To ordinary living beings, the voice would cause immense pain, but to a great sage like him, it only caused a slight tremor. Oh, Yuan Realm's soul domain? Gaition Mo was slightly surprised. As a great sage expert, he was able to see through the clues. From the other party's soul power, Gaition Mo could sense that the other party's soul had reached the Yuan realm. Seems like he truly did not disappoint me. Gaition Mo sneered and stood up, playing with the jade bottle in his hand. The remnant mark within, along with the turbulence, shook continuously, revealing rays of sharpness. If Suyu was here, he would not be unfamiliar with it. It was not for nothing. It was the ancestral technique remnant mark on the returning ruins' divine monument. But the remnant mark within the bottle was extremely shallow, as though it was an imitation. However, there shouldn't be a need for me to do anything, Gaition Mo said lightly. With his strength, of the ancient saints could be killed with of them. Let them practice, Gaition Mo murmured. Speaking of which, Xiao Yan had narrowly escaped death and returned with a panicked expression on his face. Lord Sage, whereof of saints she came, Su, demon, saint of. She wanted to tell Gaition Mo that Su Yu's strength was beyond imagination. Su of. Xiao Yan hurriedly retreated and said respectfully, My lords, it is about that strong man. I believe that Lord Gaition Mo would like to know. She did not dare to act rashly. The 3 guards in front of her were the close confidants of Gaition Mo. They were extremely mysterious. It was said that the 2 hall masters, who had been killed by Suyu, did not even dare to breathe in front of the 3 guards. It was still unknown how strong they were. For many years, almost no one had seen them in action. The only thing they knew was that if there was a difficult bone to chew, they would attack. Often, no one knew how they attacked, and those hard bones were killed in a very short time. The most sensational was once, in a large civilization, there were several ancient saints. The Skull Group did not know about it and went to invade. As a result, they were killed by several reclusive ancient saints. They suffered heavy casualties, and nearly 1/10 of the Skull Group's combat power was wiped out. At the critical moment, the 3 mysterious guards appeared. After just half an hour, they came back with the heads of the 3 ancient saints. Since then, the 3 guards had become the taboo existence of the Skull Group, second only to Gaition Mo Everything will wait for Guy Tianmo to come out, the three guards said expressionlessly. They did not take Suyu seriously. But at that moment, Guy Tianmo's voice came from inside. In you go. Among the three guards, the only female guard turned around and bowed to the secret room. Yes, Lord Guy Tianmo. Ing stood up expressionlessly and took a step out. Xiao Yin hurriedly retreated, her heart quickly calming down. Ing was the weakest among the three guards, but she was more than enough to deal with Suyu. As for you, Xiao Yin, clean up the last batch of captives, Guy Tianmo said. Xiao Yin said respectfully, Yes, Lord Guy Tianmo. Watching Xiao Yin leave, Guy Tianmo laughed coldly. This woman has no other skills, but she is cruel and merciless. Many of the captives and people who were beheaded were personally killed by Xiao Yin. In terms of viciousness, there were not many women who could beat her. Xiao Yin came to the formation where the captives were imprisoned. She divided the captives into two types. One was from the surrounding civilization, and the other was from the broken civilization. The captives from the broken civilization were all wealthy merchants who passed by or strong men who came to explore the way. Xiao Yin ordered the beheading of the creatures from the surrounding civilization. However, Xiao Yin did not kill any of the people from the broken civilization. Instead, she tortured them one by one until they could neither live nor die. This was especially true for the creatures from Wenyuan City. The arrival of Xiao Yin made the creatures of Wenyuan City in the formation turn pale, and they all retreated. Those who had not been tortured were even more terrified. Xiao Yin sneered coldly. My fellow countrymen, I am here again. Her beautiful eyes swept back and forth among them, looking for the next target. Most of the people were retreating frantically for fear of being targeted by Xiao Yin. Only one person did not change her expression. Her face still maintained a tranquil expression without fear. She only looked at her quietly with a pitiful gaze. Xiao Yin immediately noticed her, and her eyes narrowed. What is your name? The tranquil woman did not say a word, but only looked at her with pity. That gaze made Xiao Yin very uncomfortable, and a trace of hostility flickered between her brows. Pull her out. Two guards immediately rushed in and dragged the woman out. Xiao Yin said coldly, Let me ask you, why are you looking at me like that? The woman looked calm and said, Because you're going to die soon. Bang! Xiao Yin kicked the woman's abdomen, and the latter bent over in pain, but the pity in her eyes deepened. Why? Xiao Yin said coldly. Chapter 2941. The woman was none other than Sheng Yuanxin. As one of the people who knew Suyu best, Sheng Yuanxin was almost certain that Xiao Yin would not have a good ending. This was because, throughout history, no matter who it was, all of Suyu's enemies had the same ending. There was no exception. Even if their cultivation was many times stronger than Suyu's, they would eventually fall at Suyu's feet. Xiao Yin had barely escaped death, but he insisted on coming back to take revenge on Suyu. In Sheng Yuanxin's eyes, he was courting death. Oh, you mean Suyu? Xiao Yin squinted his eyes as he stared at Sheng Yuanxin. A malicious smile bloomed on his lips. It seems like I am very lucky. On the other side, Suyu stood in the center of the Blackwater civilization, scanning the surroundings. His soul was rapidly searching the entire civilization for Sheng Yuanxin's whereabouts. Suddenly, his eyebrows twitched. A powerful aura appeared within the range of his soul perception. He opened his eyes and stared at the sky. A figure was approaching like a rainbow. It was a woman, but her cultivation was as strong as a late ancient saint. In terms of strength, she was much stronger than Bai Shui. Not only was there a Gai Tian demon, but there was also a strong ancient saint. What was the skeleton group looking for in the ruins of this ruined civilization? Ing landed and looked at Suyu in front of her. She was disappointed. I thought it would be someone powerful, but it turns out to be a lowly human. No wonder Lord Gai Tian demon thought I could handle this alone. Ing removed the crescent moon scimitar from her arm. The scimitar was pitch black, glistening with a green poisonous fog. The poisonous fog was no ordinary poison. It was an intense poison that was specially designed to subdue late-stage heavenly law masters. Once the wound was cut, even if it was just a small cut, it would be enough to paralyze a late-stage heavenly lawmaster. The number of ancient sages that Ing had killed with this artifact was in the double digits. Let's finish this quickly. Ing waved her hand, and the full moon scimitar turned into a fragmentary line as it flew toward Suyu, leaving a jet-black trail in its wake. Then, the line split into two into four, and four into infinity. In a short moment, it turned into a giant net that covered the sky. It completely sealed off the space where Suyu was, making it impossible for him to escape. Suyu looked up and stretched out a finger. He gathered the strength of his holy body and blasted it out. With the strength of his sacred body, he should be able to shatter the entire net. However, the giant net merely shook for a moment before stabilizing itself and pouncing forward at an even faster speed. Suyu was slightly surprised, and he displayed his 8 great domains once again. However, when his domain power struck the giant net, the same thing happened. Not only did his domain power disappear without a trace, but the giant net actually grew a bit stronger. Finally, Suyu understood everything. The poison contained in the giant net actually had another extremely mysterious function, which was to dissolve the enemy's power and turn it into a part of the giant net. The stronger the enemy's resistance, the stronger the giant net would be. Finally, when it enveloped the enemy, it was enough to kill them in one move. Accept your fate. Don't waste your energy, Ing said calmly. She had already killed many ancient sages with this move. Many of them possessed peerless divine abilities or peerless treasures. However, under a crescent moon scimitar, they all turned to dust. Suyu said expressionlessly, "There's another one who looks like him." He had initially thought that the Skull unit was just a motley crew, but who knew that beneath the demon guy Tion, there was another powerful existence. However, no matter how powerful she was still at the level of an ancient sage. If she was a great saint, he would still be a little afraid. Unfortunately, she was not one. Suyu raised his finger and drew a scar on his chest. The scar was filled with an extremely mysterious concept, as if it contained the essence of some kind of divine technique. Creak! Indistinctly, it seemed like a giant eagle's claw streaked across the sky. The giant net, which had absorbed all energy, was split into 2 from the middle and was completely torn apart. Suyu stood at his original position, not moving an inch. The torn giant net brushed past Suyu. What? Ying's cold and stiff face was suddenly filled with shock. The move that she was most proud of had actually been broken. She could not help but look at Suyu again and said in surprise, "What you just used should be the Eagle Clan's first-generation secret technique, right? However, why is it even more powerful than the Eagle Clan's secret technique?" She had been fortunate enough to exchange blows with the recently extinct Eagle Clan Saint Clan, as she had experienced their secret techniques. However, those secret techniques weren't as powerful as Suyu's. Without saying a word, Suyu drew another trajectory. Ying's pupils shrank, as she hurriedly placed the full moon scimitar in front of her chest to block Suyu's mysterious attack. Clang! Crack! With a crisp sound, the top-notch Nirvana artifact, the full moon scimitar, was broken into 2 pieces starting from the middle. "Ah!" Ing screamed. The scar not only tore the full moon scimitar apart, but also split her chest open. Fresh blood spurted out from her chest. Just one move had caused Ing to be seriously injured. Her pretty eyes were filled with intense fear, and without saying a word, she turned and fled. Suyu followed behind her unhurriedly and raised his finger to draw another stroke. This time he cut off her right arm. Then, with another stroke, he drew a bloody wound on her back that was so deep that the bone could be seen. Accompanied by a rain of blood and shrill screams, the 2 of them chased after each other, leaving behind a long bloody path. "Lord Guy Tianma, there's an extremely strong enemy. Save me." Ing hurriedly sent out a message. As long as Guy Tianma received the message, he would be able to arrive in a few breaths' time. Once Guy Tianma arrived, Suyu would be nothing to her. However, to Ying's despair, Suyu grabbed the air and pulled the wave of the message back into his palm. Then, he put his palms together and twisted them gently, completely shattering the wave. "You can't escape," Suyu said expressionlessly as he took a step forward. Ying's heart was pounding, and she had never felt such panic before. It was like when she was still a mortal and she had encountered a hungry wolf that was hunting her down on the mountain. That sense of despair almost suffocated her. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that there were actually 3 communication signals just now. One of them was sent to Guy Tianma, but the other 2 were hidden under the wave of the message and were secretly sent out without Suyu's detection. The target of the message was none other than her other 2 companions. If the 3 of them joined forces, there was a chance that they could compete with Suyu. Finally, after just a few breaths' time, her other 2 companions caught up with her in shock. They looked at Ying's severely injured body and couldn't help but be shocked. Ying, who injured you like this? In their memories, this was the first time that Ying had received such a serious injury. Ying couldn't care less about talking to them. She said, quickly join forces to deal with that human. He is proficient in an ancestral technique. By now, Ying had already realized that what Suyu had used was definitely the legendary ancestral technique. Chapter 2942. Ancestral Techniques. The 2 ancient sages were shocked. There were very few forces that were proficient in ancestral techniques. They had to be at least at the level of the Holy Clan. Furthermore, every Holy Clan treated ancestral techniques as a top secret. Only the great sages of each generation could cultivate them. The rest of the clan members could not even touch them. The Skull Group had been collecting ancestral techniques from the abandoned civilizations for almost an entire era, but the ancestral techniques they had collected were all in a blurry state. How could they be like Suyu, who had such a complete set of ancestral techniques? Even for the holy clans of the 9-star civilizations, unless they were great sages, the ordinary clansmen could not cultivate ancestral techniques. Who are you? The 3 of them asked as they gathered together. If Suyu was some powerful descendant of the Holy Clan, then they would be in deep trouble. Suyu calmly said, Naturally, I am here to exterminate the Skull Group. With a swipe of his finger, another Eagle Clan ancestral technique swept over. The 3 of them had grave expressions. Ying was even more terrified, but with her 2 companions by her side, she was much calmer. She had already lost her full moon scimitar, so she could only rely on the domain she had cultivated. As for the other 2, they each took out their own Dao artifacts. One of them had a Dao artifact that was filled with absolute killing intent, while the other's was filled with extreme coldness. With the 3 of them working together, the 3 forces resisted Suyu's Eagle Clan ancestral technique. In the end, all 3 of their domains and Dao artifacts were forced back. Even so, the 3 of them were forced back, their bodies trembling. Among them, Ying's injuries were the heaviest, and she vomited blood on the spot. The other 3 were stronger than her, but their bodies were in intense pain. With just one move, Suyu had suppressed the 3 of them with his own strength. Not good. Quickly inform my lord, we are not his match. The 3 of them were shocked. No matter how strong an ancient sage was, the 3 of them could easily kill him if they worked together. But Suyu's strength was too strange, too strong. Let's go. The 3 of them immediately headed toward the place where Guy Tianma was cultivating. Suyu calmly said, You think you can come and go as you please? He performed hand seals with both hands, shooting out 10 seals in a row. This was the Heavenly Spider Clan's ancestral technique, Heaven Binding Imprisoning Net. As soon as they were unleashed, the 10 seals weaved together to form a massive net that enshrouded the 3 fleeing ancient sages. What? Another ancestral method? The 3 of them turned pale with fright. Feeling a strong threat to their lives, the 3 of them no longer hesitated. They immediately crushed the jade and sent a message to Guy Tianmo, who was in seclusion, asking him to help. However, as soon as the news spread out, it was intercepted by the ancestral technique of the Heavenly Spider race. This net could not only block the body, but it could also completely isolate all kinds of obscure energy. Accept your fate. So you closed his eyes and weaved signs again. A fiery red mark gathered in his palm. The ancestral technique of the fiery phoenix tribe. The 3 of them gasped. Up until now, Suyu had displayed 3 ancestral techniques in succession. How was this possible? Someone who hadn't even reached the great sage level had mastered 3 ancestral skills. There had never been such a heaven-defying genius in the 9-star civilization. As soon as the mark appeared, the entire sky was illuminated in a fiery red. The 3 people's despairing faces were illuminated with a dark red light in the secret area. Guy Tianmo was absorbing the last trace of the mark. While collecting, he could not help but frown slightly. Ing hasn't come back yet. According to his estimation, Ing should have succeeded in killing the mysterious strong man by now. However, why hasn't he replied yet? Crack! Suddenly, something in his bosom shattered. Because it appeared too suddenly, he was caught off guard. The mark in his hand that was about to be successfully extracted immediately dissipated. Guy Tianmo was a little incredulous. He took out 3 life cards from his arms, each of which was engraved with a name. Among them, the life card with the word Ing was broken into pieces, and a trace of blood flowed from the cracks. Ing is dead? How is that possible? Guy Tianmo was shocked. According to his estimation, Ing was more than enough to deal with the mysterious strong man. How could she be dead? His face quickly turned cold, and his face was full of murderous intent. He shouted, "Arrogant! Arrogant! Bring me his head!" Unexpectedly, as soon as his voice fell, there were 2 consecutive cracking sounds. Looking down, the other 2 life cards were both broken. Who? Guy Tianmo stood up abruptly, his face filled with deep shock. Ying's cultivation was the lowest among the 3 of them. However, Ao and Kwang were much stronger than Ing. However, the 2 of them had been destroyed one after another. One could imagine how powerful the person who attacked was. The person who attacked was definitely not the mysterious strong man. There must be another expert, or even a great sage who was not inferior to him. Guy Tianmo squinted his eyes. "You ruined the plans of my skull team. Let me see how many lives you have." His figure flashed, and he instantly broke out of the secret area and stood in the void. "Come here. Accept your death." Guy Tianmo roared. But before his roar had died down, a voice came from behind him. "Is it very painful? Why didn't you have a shred of mercy when you slaughtered billions of lives?" Guy Tianmo suddenly turned his head and saw a calm, silver-haired young man looking at him indifferently. "Who are you?" Guy Tianmo's eyes suddenly became sharp, as if he had seen through Suyu in an instant. Then his gaze shifted away, and he looked around vigilantly. Who else? Come out. The youth in front of him only had the cultivation of a middle-stage Heaven Law Master, and he did not have the ability to kill Ing and the other 2. He must have had the help of another expert. Suyu stood in front of him with his hands clasped behind his back and said expressionlessly, "If you are referring to the person who killed your 3 guards, then I can answer you." "It's you?" Guy Tianmo looked at Suyu again, his eyes full of disbelief. "You? Tell me, where is that person hiding?" As he spoke, he flicked his hand, and a wisp of the terrifying power of a great sage suddenly swept over. Suyu stood where he was, not moving an inch. He just opened his mouth and let out a breath, and the airflow turned into a mark that circled in front of him. Although Guy Tianmo's strength was powerful, this was just a casual attack, not even a 10,000th of his true strength. Therefore, the mark easily dissolved it. Ancestral technique? Guy Tianmo was shocked. He finally looked at Suyu and said seriously, "Who are you?" Only a great sage of the Saint clan could master such a complete ancestral technique. But what was Suyu's cultivation level? How did he master the ancestral technique? The person who wants your life. Suyu performed several ancestral techniques in a row. Guy Tianmo's pupils shrank when he saw this. How could a person master several ancestral techniques? "Are you a student of the Saint Thief?" Guy Tianmo was surprised. If there was anyone in the world who could master multiple ancestral techniques, it was only the Saint Thief. The Saint Thief was the most special great sage of the 9-star civilization. He never stole the belongings of the living, only the dead. Chapter 2943. Therefore, Holy Pirate dug out many lost ancestral techniques from the ancient tombs of the extinct Sacred Clan. For example, the ancestral technique of the Eagle Clan that Suyu had just performed was one of the techniques unearthed by the Divine Pirate. Therefore, when he saw Suyu perform several ancestral techniques in succession, he immediately thought that Suyu was the descendant of the Holy Pirate. Seeing the ancestral technique attack, Gai Tianmo was not afraid at all. In the end, Suyu's cultivation was still too shallow. Even though he had mastered the ancestral techniques, their power was still very limited. He had merely condensed a vortex in front of him, and he had successfully crushed all the ancestral techniques. After the initial shock, Gai Tianmo could finally confirm that it was indeed Suyu who had killed Mia Ying and the other two. Such a powerful ancestral method was more than enough to kill them. His expression was gradually replaced by excitement. "Aha, you really came at the right time. I was just worried that I wouldn't be able to report on time, and now you've delivered yourself to my door." The remnant marks he had accumulated were far from meeting the requirements. There were still at least half of them left. However, Suyu's body had countless remnant scars, and if he was killed, he could extract the ancestral technique from his body and complete the task easily. In his heart, Suyu was simply a gift that had been delivered to his doorstep. That depends on how capable you are. Suyu stopped using the remnant marks. In the face of a great saint, an ordinary remnant mark attack would not cause any harm at all. Gai Tianmo laughed, and the demonic aura around him vibrated. He said, "Descendant of Saint Thief, hand over your life." He had to be wary of other great saints' descendants. But Saint Pirate was a great saint with no one to rely on and only knew how to collect the belongings of the dead. What was there to be afraid of? Demon Sun devours the sky. The demon chi around covering Heaven Demon turned into a huge demon dragon, roaring and pouncing. Inside the demon dragon's body, one hand after another reached out. As long as one touched it, they would be grabbed by the demon dragon and then pulled in, becoming a prisoner of the demon dragon. Then, the heaven-covering demon would extract all of their power. Suyu was expressionless. He raised his hand and waved, and a delicate long sword fell into his palm. That was the absolute heaven sword he had obtained. The sword was still in its sheath, but even so, it still emitted a piercingly cold aura that caused one's heart to palpitate. As the demonic dragon approached, Suyu swung his sword. A piercingly cold sword energy seeped through the scabbard and overflowed to the outside world. The giant demonic dragon was immediately split into two, and each of them brushed past Suyu. The remaining sword chi did not lose its momentum and slashed toward Gai Tianmo. The latter narrowed his eyes and retreated while displaying his domain to resist. Rumble. Finally, with a muffled sound, the domain was broken, but the sword chi was also weakened. Without waiting for Gai Tianmo to heave a sigh of relief, the sky above his head darkened. Suyu leaped up with the absolute heaven sword in his hand and chopped down from above. With this slash, more sword chi burst out from it and slashed straight at Gai Tianmo. The latter's eyelids twitched. What sword was that? It was already so terrifying without being unsheathed. If it was unsheathed, wouldn't it be able to destroy the world? However, Gai Tian Demon was not afraid. He raised his hand and took out a Dao weapon that looked like a stone puppet and placed it above his head. Clang! The absolute heaven sword slashed on the Dao artifact, creating a long spark. Immediately after, the Dao artifact began to break from the middle. What? Gai Tianmo was taken aback. That Dao tool was a peerless defensive Dao tool. It could withstand the attack of a great sage peak without being damaged at all. However, Suyu had sliced it into two with a casual strike of his sword. The long sword shattered the Dao tool and slashed toward the top of his head. How could Gai Tianmo dare to be careless? Without hesitation, he took out the jade bottle that he had painstakingly collected and opened it. All the seals inside flew out and turned into a cloud-like shield above his head. 1,000 ancestral techniques go. Gai Tianmo shouted softly. A series of runes immediately began to fluctuate erratically before abruptly erupting with dazzling light. Suyu and the sword were blasted thousands of miles away. His bones seemed to be falling apart, and his body shook violently. A mouthful of blood could not help but gush out of his throat. The remnant seals that Gai Tianmo had mastered were all relatively weak ancestral techniques, but they could not withstand Gai Tianmo's superb strength. He could casually activate them with great power that could not be resisted. In the end, the difference in cultivation between the two sides was too great, and there was no way for him to face it head-on. Gai Tianmo was unforgiving, and he came over with the remnant seals. Looking at the terrible long sword in Suyu's hand, he said with lingering fear, "Hand over that sword, and I will spare your life." His heart was filled with greed. That sword was too terrifying. Suyu was only a junior at the middle stage of the Heavenly Lawmaster, but he could hold his own against him with that sword. If it fell into his hands, wouldn't its power be even more shocking? Suyu stood up and held the red hilt of the sword. He said coldly, "If you want the sword, can I?" He took a deep breath, held the hilt, and slowly pulled out the sword. He had not been willing to pull out the sword before, because the absolute heaven sword was too difficult to control. Every time he used it, he would use up most of his strength. Therefore, he had been very careful when using it. Now, it seemed that he had to use it. Moreover, there were no more innocent creatures in the entire Blackwater civilization. Almost all of them had been killed by them. Later, when the sword caused a massacre, it would only kill the heartless creatures of the Skull Unit. He would not feel any psychological burden. Clang! The absolute heaven sword was slowly pulled out of the sheath. When it was pulled out an inch, the world began to shake. The entire Blackwater civilization seemed to be overwhelmed, and it swayed unceasingly. The blood-red seawater formed huge waves, which drowned the earth and the mountains. The members of the Skull Unit all flew up into the sky in panic, and they looked at the sudden change in the world in shock. Some of the members, with powerful cultivations, looked in the direction of the absolute heaven sword with trembling hearts. They instinctively felt that there was an extremely terrifying aura coming from there. It was as if the weapon of extinction was descending upon the world. Gai Tianmo was about to approach, but the moment the sword was pulled out of the sheath, he could not help but be alarmed. He hurriedly shouted, "Stop!" His instincts told him that once the sword was pulled out of the sheath, it would kill him easily. Suyu turned a deaf ear and said coldly, "Don't you want this sword? Why? You don't want it anymore." He continued to exert force in his palm, pulling out the absolute heaven sword bit by bit. It was not that he did not want to quickly pull out the sword to kill Gai Tianmo. It was that the sword spirit of the absolute heaven sword was resisting him and was unwilling to come out of the sheath. Gai Tianmo's brows began to twitch violently, and a life and death crisis that he had never felt before shrouded his heart. After weighing the pros and cons, he gritted his teeth and actually abandoned the absolute heaven sword in front of him and flew into the sky to escape. "You want to leave?" Suyu wanted to kill Gai Tianmo the most. If this person was not killed, there would be a second Skull Unit. The space domain was displayed, and Suyu immediately chased after him, although the distance between them was rapidly increasing. But with the terror of the absolute heaven sword, he was still within range of being killed. Clang! Finally, the absolute heaven sword was pulled out, and with the help of the great sage of the Feng clan and old demon Shui, he barely managed to stabilize the absolute heaven sword. He raised the absolute heaven sword and pointed it at Gai Tianmo. The latter's heart was beating wildly, and he shouted angrily, "Surnamed Su, do you really want to fight to the death?" Suyu shook his head. "You are wrong. The fish will die, but the net will not break." Chapter 2944. Gai Tianmo's heart was beating wildly, and a sense of impending death enveloped his heart. He had experienced countless life and death crises in his life, but none of them left such a deep impression. Even the last time, when he was almost annihilated by many ancient sages from the abandoned civilization, he felt far less threatened than this time. He had a hunch that if this sword were to fall, he would be killed and sent into the ultimate ruins, and there would be no possibility of survival. Human, we have no enmity in the past, and there is no hatred between us. How about this? Guy Tianma said, to tell you the truth, behind me is the 9-star civilization, a huge force beyond your imagination. If I die, not only will you not get any benefits, but you will also suffer a disaster. After careful consideration, Suyu killing Guy Tianma would only bring harm and no benefit. Moreover, he had not caused any substantial harm to Suyu. In essence, the hatred between the two sides had not intensified. There is really no need for the two sides to become enemies. However, that being said, what Guy Tianma thought was another matter. Suyu held the absolute heaven sword in his hand, which was the reason why Guy Tianma could not let him go. As long as he was given a chance to live this time, he would do everything possible to snatch Suyu's sword back. Unfortunately, Suyu was not a young boy, but a person who had experienced countless battles and witnessed countless intrigues. He could see through Guy Tianma's thoughts better than anyone else. Isn't it too late to say this now? Suyu said lightly, raising the absolute heaven sword in his hand without any hesitation. With just a slash from a distance, Guy Tianma could be slashed into dust. However, at this moment, a woman's figure rushed over and stood in front of Guy Tianma. The woman was none other than Xiao Yan, who had a deep hatred for Suyu. She was not alone, and there was another person in her hand. Sheng Yuanxin. Sheng Yuanxin's strength was sealed, and she could not move. She could only let Xiao Yan capture her. Xiao Yan said mockingly, "Come on, cut him off. If you don't want to see your old lover die, then do it as soon as possible." There was a hint of viciousness in her smile. Knowing that Sheng Yuanxin and Suyu might know each other, she searched Sheng Yuanxin's soul and unexpectedly found out that the two turned out to be fellow countrymen Suyu met shortly after he first entered the martial path. Furthermore, their relationship was extremely harmonious, and there was even a hint of affection between them. From her memories, Xiao Yan knew that Suyu was a person who valued relationships and was willing to dig out his own heart for his daughter. Such a person's weakness was simply too fatal. As expected, Suyu's pupils constricted, and he slowly lowered the absolute heaven sword that he had raised. The smile on his face cracked, and he was even happier. It was indeed so. When Guy Tianmo saw this, he felt relieved. He was pleasantly surprised. He didn't expect that the mad dog, Xiao Yan, could actually bring him a chance to turn the situation around. Well done. Guy Tianmo praised and immediately came to Xiao Yan's side to help him capture Sheng Yuanxin. Right now, Sheng Yuanxin was his life-saving talisman. He could not afford to lose her. Suyu, retreat now, or you won't want to know the consequences, Guy Tianma threatened. Xiao Yan immediately added, also, if you want her to live, put down the sword in your hand. Then kneel on the ground and kowtow to me in repentance. Otherwise, I will cut her into 1,000 pieces in front of you and let her have a taste of all the punishments in the world. Xiao Yan was already familiar with torture. She knew better than anyone how to make a beautiful woman completely radiant from body to heart. Guy Tianma hesitated for a moment, then allowed Xiao Yan to continue. If Suyu was a person who valued relationships and loyalty, he might not only be able to keep his life, but he could also get that terrible sword. As long as he got that sword, what was Suyu? He could be destroyed with a flick of a finger. Suyu stood where he was, unmoved, as if he was hesitating. Xiao Yan's face was ferocious. She grabbed Sheng Yuanxin's neck and said with a grim smile, "Why don't you do as I say and kneel down immediately?" She was sure that Suyu would do as she said. Once he knelt down and put down the absolute heaven sword, then Suyu's fate would be in her hands. She must let Suyu have a taste of living hell, and let him understand that what he did to her that day was the most regrettable thing in his life. However, Suyu still did not make a move. After pondering for a long time, he sighed softly. There's no other way. Xiao Yan grinned. It seemed that Suyu had given in. Guy Tianma could not help but feel excited. He stared at Suyu's palm, waiting for the moment when the absolute heaven sword fell. But unexpectedly, Suyu did not let go of the absolute heaven sword. Instead, he held the absolute heaven sword and swept it towards them. What? Their faces changed dramatically. Xiao Yan's maniacal smile froze on her face. Her mind went blank as she felt the sword energy slashing towards her. In Shang Yuanxin's soul-searching, Su was obviously a person who valued relationships and loyalty to the extreme. It was absolutely impossible for him to watch Shang Yuanxin die. But why did he not give in and even publicly kill Shang Yuanxin? Suddenly, Xiao Yin remembered something. It was an inadvertent interlude during the soul-searching process. She directly ignored it and did not take it to heart. But now that she thought about it, she shuddered. She looked down at Shang Yuanxin again, and the corners of the latter's mouth gently curled into a smile. It was a smile of success. "You tricked me," Xiao Yin finally realized and screamed sharply. From the beginning, Shang Yuanxin exposed her relationship with Su Yu openly and secretly. It was a trap designed by Shang Yuanxin. This was because Shang Yuanxin cultivated the realm of 6 paths and had 6 clones. When one died, another body would immediately replace it. Unless all 6 clones were destroyed at the same time, Shang Yuanxin could not be killed. Su Yu's sword could at most kill one of her clones, and then she would resurrect on the spot. Except for suffering a little pain before death, there was essentially no loss. It was precisely because she knew this that Shang Yuanxin deliberately exposed her relationship with Su Yu and lured Xiao Yin to use her as a hostage in front of Su Yu. Su Yu also knew about the existence of Shang Yuanxin's realm of 6 paths, so he must know what to do. Kill Xiao Yin as well. Otherwise, Xiao Yin, this insidious woman, would hide again when she saw that the situation was not good, and it would not be easy to find her again. And by the time she hibernated long enough, it would be too late to stir up trouble and harm living creatures. Xiao Yin, who understood this, was furious. She raised her hand and slapped Shang Yuanxin's head, venting the resentment of being tricked. However, before she slapped down, the destructive sword of the Absolute Heaven Sword had already arrived. In an instant, both Xiao Yin and Shang Yuanxin disappeared in the sword light. The latter maintained a smile on her face, quietly watching Su Yu in the distance, waiting for death and rebirth. The sword light flashed, and the two were annihilated in the light. Gai Tianma, on the other hand, had long seen that the situation was not good and fled far away. He cursed in his heart. "I actually believed that stupid bitch." Originally, he had fled far away, but in the end, he believed Xiao Yin and returned. Chapter 2945. At the critical moment of life and death, Gai Tian Mo roared and turned into boundless demonic energy, fleeing in all directions. As he fled, he shouted, "Surnamed Su, I'm a member of a super sacred clan. My status is high. If you kill me, a great calamity will befall you." Super Saint race? So you did not take it seriously. The famed Sword Sacred Clan was ranked 3rd among the sacred clans. They could be considered a super sacred clan, right? But so what? Didn't he still die in his hands? Furthermore, he did not believe that any Super Saint clan would dare to admit that they were involved with the Skull unit that was filled with crimes. "Don't worry. No one will come to take revenge for you," Su Yu said calmly. However, Gai Tianma obviously couldn't hear this sentence. This was because the sword light had already rushed over and destroyed all the devil chi. The screams of Gai Tian Mo came from all directions. He turned into thousands of devil chi, and none of them managed to escape. "Humans, even if I die, don't think you'll have it easy either." Before he died, Gai Tian Mo let out a resentful cry. "My Gai Tian clan is not so easy to kill." His voice drifted in the 9 heavens, then converged into a black demonic eye, which swooped down toward Su Yu. Su Yu's expression changed slightly, and he immediately dodged. However, once the demonic eye fixed its eyes on Su Yu, he couldn't get rid of it no matter what. No matter what level of space domain Su Yu used, the demonic eye followed him like a shadow, and the distance between them didn't increase at all. In the end, the demonic eye hit Su Yu's shoulder, causing him to feel a burning pain. Su Yu rolled up his sleeves to take a look, only to see that a vivid black demonic eye had appeared on his arm. The demonic eye did not harm the body, but it constantly released fluctuations to the outside world. Su Yu tried to isolate it with the ripples, but it was extremely difficult. The ripples were very special, and no matter how strong his power was, he couldn't seal them completely. There would always be a faint ripple that would leak out. Gai Tian clan, Suyu murmured. There was no need to examine this signal carefully to know that it was sent to the so-called heaven-covering clan. It meant that Gai Tianma had died at the hands of Suyu, and he was using this as an excuse to draw his people to seek revenge. It seems like it will be slightly troublesome, Suyu said calmly. Before officially stepping into a 9-star civilization, he had already formed a grudge with the so-called Super Saint race. However, if the Cauldron he led wanted to occupy a seat among the 9-star civilizations, he could not avoid friction with the forces inside. It seems like I need to gather more power before I can set foot in a 9-star civilization, Suyu mused. Shaking his head, he returned to the place where he had just killed Gai Tian-Mo and stared at the place where Sheng Yuanxin had died. However, even after waiting for a long time, Sheng Yuanxin still hadn't regained her form. He couldn't help but feel nervous. Could it be that I was wrong? Suyu looked around carefully, but there was still no sign of the Saint primordial spirit condensing nearby. Oh no, did an accident really happen? His heart skipped a beat, and he immediately panicked. However, at this moment, someone patted his shoulder lightly. Suyu turned his head abruptly and saw a tranquil face with a faint smile. You seem to be worried about me, Sheng Yuanxin said with a faint smile, so you could finally relax. He glared at her and said reproachfully, You scared me. For a moment, Suyu was really scared, and he felt an indescribable sense of panic. He was afraid that his sword was too powerful and that Sheng Yuanxin wouldn't even have the chance to replace the Six Paths body. It won't happen again. Sheng Yuanxin stuck out her tongue and said apologetically. This made Suyu feel embarrassed, and his gaze softened again. I'm sorry for making you suffer. The feeling of death was not pleasant. The sword had struck Sheng Yuanxin's body, and the pain was so intense that Suyu, who had died multiple times, could feel it. No, I have implicated you. It's all my fault for being too weak. Sheng Yuanxin sighed. Hearing this, Suyu took out half of the primordial energy without hesitation. Go into seclusion immediately after returning. Sheng Yuanxin only smiled slightly and accepted the primordial energy. She was not moved by the value of the gift. Her eyes were filled with tenderness, and she looked at Suyu more than she looked at the gift. All right, I'll listen to you. Sheng Yuanxin smiled gently. After the two of them looked at each other and smiled, Suyu opened the Nightmare Crossing Lotus Seat. You should go in and cultivate. I need to deal with the remaining members of the Skull team. Sheng Yuanxin had never liked fighting and killing. Hearing this, she nodded and entered the Nightmare Crossing Lotus Seat obediently. Suyu surveyed the entire Blackwater civilization. With the death of Gai Tianma, all the members of the Skull team had scattered like birds and beasts, fleeing far away in panic. He was expressionless as he held the Absolute Heaven Sword in his hand and stabbed it into the ground of the Blackwater civilization. The Absolute Heaven Sword was a peerless and ferocious sword that could even kill a great saint with a single strike. How could a deserted star like the Blackwater civilization withstand it? In an instant, the entire Blackwater civilization, with the Absolute Heaven Sword as the center, crumbled in all directions. The members of the Skull team who had yet to flee were killed in the blink of an eye. As for the living creatures who had fled into the starry sky, they still could not escape from this calamity. This was because there was still a sinful woman above them. Creak! A giant black lotus flashed across the sky, and a rain of blood started to fall. Suyu soared into the sky and began to exterminate the remaining members of the Skull team. However, there were too many of them, and it was impossible for the two of them to kill all of them. Suyu's eyes darkened. He raised his hand and grasped. The 8 prime level domains gathered in his palm and formed an 8-colored radiance. With Suyu as the center, the radiance quickly radiated in all directions. In an instant, it passed through the many members of the Skull team and formed a giant 8-colored radiance above their heads. The radiance also condensed into 5 words. Skull team member. Suyu and the sinful woman met up. The latter had an apologetic look on her face. I'm sorry, Suyu. I did not follow your instructions and kept all of them. Suyu shook his head. Not keeping all of them might not be a bad thing. You took out a great seal. As soon as the seal appeared, the sinful lady almost cried out in shock. She blinked her eyes in astonishment and disbelief. Don't tell me that you brought back the seal of the main hall of the Temple of Heaven? As one of the members of the Heavenly Law Palace's sub-palace in the past, the sinful woman had no reason not to recognize the great seal of the Heavenly Law Palace. Suyu smiled faintly. Then tell me what this is. The sinful woman covered her mouth and sucked in a breath of cold air. How did you do it? Even if Suyu's abilities were very powerful, the Heavenly Law Palace's main palace was filled with experts. It was said that there were generations of palace masters. It would be extremely difficult to snatch the great seal of the main palace from them. The palace master gave it to me, Suyu said vaguely. Without waiting for the sinful woman to ask in detail, Suyu activated his energy into the great seal. The great seal of the Heavenly Law Palace continued to vibrate. Chapter 2946. Suyu said in a dignified voice, Pass on the order of the Palace of Heaven. Order all living beings of the abandoned civilization to kill the members of the Skull Unit. The vast voice blended into the waves and spread throughout the entire abandoned civilization. From the nearby ruins to the 9-star civilization, everyone heard the summons from the great seal of the Heavenly Law. What? The order of the Palace of Heaven? How could that be? The Palace of Heaven is a 9-star civilization. Why would they summon the forces of an abandoned civilization? Could it be that the 9-star civilization is finally paying attention to us? No matter what, this is an order from the Palace of Heaven. If we respond to it, there will only be benefits. It had to be said that any 9-star civilization's aristocratic family had an unparalleled appeal to the abandoned civilization's living beings. In an instant, all living beings responded to the call. Even the ancient sages, who had been in seclusion, began to surround and kill the Skull Unit after some hesitation. As for the members of the Skull Unit, Suyu marked their identities with the 8 great domains above their heads. When the entire abandoned civilization began to move, their destruction would happen sooner or later. With the Blackwater civilization as the center, Suyu gathered tens of thousands of demonic beasts and released the living beings within the nightmare crossing Lotus Throne. With this as the center, he began to build the first great force of the abandoned civilization. There were not many experts in the abandoned civilization. The strongest force, the Skull Unit, had been destroyed. The Cauldron was the undisputed number 1 force outside of the 9-star civilization. It seems like we'll be very busy from now on. The sinful lady sensed the auras of the experts coming from all directions. Her eyes were filled with relief. After this battle, the Cauldron had completely established its position. Even if it did not deliberately recruit people, there would still be people coming from all directions to join it. Suyu let out a long sigh and said, 9-star civilization, I will be coming soon. Only by entering the 9-star civilization as a senior Cauldron would he be qualified to compete with the Sacred Mountain Emperor. His intuition told him that the day of the decisive battle with the Sacred Mountain Emperor was not far away. Time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, several months had passed. It had been 3 months since the Palace of Heaven issued the order. The heroes of the abandoned civilization gathered together and launched the final extermination operation against the Skull Unit. The Skull Unit, which normally caused the living beings of the abandoned civilization to tremble in fear, had become dogs that were beaten up by everyone. One by one, the heads were brought to the Cauldron by the people who answered the summons. After witnessing the power of the Cauldron, as well as the ability of the Cauldron to grant them the identity documents of the 9-star civilizations, one could imagine how many people wanted to join the Cauldron. Of course, the Cauldron wouldn't refuse anyone. Only those at the level of Tao Lord and above who were willing to accept the soul search and prove that they were not evil people would have the qualifications to enter. Even so, the number of people recruited was still an astronomical figure. It was said that there were 10,000 members of the Cauldron. They worked day and night for a whole month and barely finished the work. The number was simply incalculable. Based on preliminary estimates, The number of personnel the Cauldron expanded was more than 10,000 times the original number. The sinful lady looked at the entire space storage device registration register and could not help but be surprised. With such a number, I'm afraid it's even bigger than the Temple of Heaven. The Temple of Heaven was known as the aristocratic family with the largest number of members among the 9-star civilizations. This was because it did not care about one's background or race. As long as one's cultivation reached the level of the Master of the Heaven Law, they could enter the Temple of Heaven after passing a simple test. However, right now, the number of people in the Cauldron far exceeded the number of people in the Temple of Heaven. If all these people are put into the 9-star civilization, I'm afraid it will bring an unimaginable impact to the entire civilization, the sinful lady murmured. Although their strength was generally not strong, they won in terms of numbers. If they gathered into a single force, wouldn't the Temple of Heaven have to retreat? They can't enter the 9-star civilization for the time being, Suyu said. The statue that was engraved with the official documents was about to shatter due to overuse. Moreover, the number of space storage devices was extraordinarily large. No matter how many space storage devices there were, it was impossible to bring all of them into the 9-star civilization. Therefore, they could only be left outside for the time being, waiting for Suyu to get new statues and make official documents for them one by one. The power has just been formed, and we need to rule the entire abandoned civilization as soon as possible. We need to strive to bring all of them under our control, except for the 9-star civilization, Suyu said. The sinful lady pondered and said, "Leave it to me." At present, only 1/10 of the influences had come to seek refuge with the Cauldron. The rest of the influences were entrenched in their own areas. It would take a lot of time to conquer them. Thank you. Suyu cupped his hands in obeisance. Next, it was time to lead the people of the Lotus of passing evil Lotus Throne, who had obtained the official documents, to the 9-star civilization and establish a powerful family. Only then could he cooperate with the Temple of Heaven, obtain the opportunity to use the Yin-Yang Gate, and take back his body. But before he left, Suyu would not forget one person. With a flash of his figure, he once again appeared in the former Wenyuan city. Ever since Suyu had flown into a rage and wiped out all living beings within a 10,000-mile radius, the place had turned into a deathly silent land. No living beings dared to approach it. Although he had left that day, he did not dare disturb Mo Heng's training. Mo Heng could not be disturbed while he was crafting the great scythe of 10,000 calamity. Now that the Skull team had been dealt with, he could finally inquire about the progress of the great scythe of 10,000 calamity. According to Mo Heng, he only needed half a year. Calculating the time, it had been exactly half a year since the great scythe of 10,000 calamity had been handed to him. Mo Heng. Suyu came to the front of the secret chamber and cupped his fists. But there was no response from within the secret chamber. Suyu opened his eyes and immediately activated his soul eyes. In the end, the secret chamber was empty. His heart thumped, and he immediately kicked open the stone door. Mo Heng was long gone, and the great scythe of 10,000 calamity was nowhere to be seen. "You lied to me?" Suyu stood at his original position, his eyes filled with killing intent. His first thought was that Mo Heng coveted the great scythe of 10,000 calamity and had taken it away, while Suyu was dealing with the Skull team. But thinking about it carefully, he felt that this was not the case. He had never judged a person wrongly. He was confident in Mo Heng's character. But why had Mo Heng silently escaped with his great scythe of 10,000 calamity? Suyu hoped that he was wrong, that someone had taken the opportunity to kidnap Mo Heng. But from the traces at the scene, there were no signs of a fight. "Mo Heng, you better give me an explanation," Suyu muttered, clenching his teeth. He struck his chest, spitting out a mouthful of blood. The droplet of blood turned into a blood mist, forming an arrow in midair, pointing in the direction of the 9-star civilization. The great scythe of 10,000 calamity was an item that Suyu had once refined, and it contained a shred of his blood essence. No matter how far away it was, he could use the blood essence to determine its approximate location. "Those who belong to the Cauldron, follow me," Suyu shouted. Many ordinary people immediately rode on demonic beasts and followed Suyu to the 9-star civilization in a mighty manner. Chapter 29:47. At that time, the goddess clan, a fragrant aroma permeated the air, and there were indescribably beautiful women everywhere. They gathered together like orioles and swallows. Patriarch, why did you suddenly summon us? A beautiful woman with green eyes and a cold expression walked over with a slight frown. Her arrival caused the chattering women to fall silent. Their eyes were filled with fear and dread towards her. She was the young matriarch of the goddess clan, Yu Zhixian. To be exact, she was the former young matriarch. After Xia Jingyu's arrival, the position of young matriarch changed hands. As the clone of heavenly prince Mirrorflower, one could imagine how high her position was. Naturally, she became the young matriarch. Speak. Yu Zhixian was displeased. Are you treating me like air because I've been traveling outside for hundreds of years? She left the goddess clan in a fit of anger after her position as young matriarch was snatched away. She traveled outside and finally returned recently. Just now, she heard the matriarch summon and finally showed herself. After hundreds of years, Yu Zhixian was even more beautiful than before. It was just that there was a trace of coldness on her face. A clansman who used to be on good terms with her said, Zhixian, it's about the ancient cave of enchantment. She tactfully closed her mouth after she finished speaking. When Yu Zhixian was stripped of her position, she expressed her dissatisfaction and went to the ancient cave of enchantment with Xia Jingyu to take the test of heaven's will. In the end, she suffered a crushing defeat and completely lost her position. Now, after 100 years, the first mission she faced was actually the ancient cave of enchantment. It was unknown whether it was a coincidence or a deliberate action. The ancient cave of enchantment. Yu Zhixian's expression became quite strange. She seemed to be in pain, but also expectant. It was obvious that Yu Zhixian had calculated that the ancient cave of enchantment was about to begin. After hearing this, the rest of the clansmen silently stepped aside for fear of getting close to Yu Zhixian. Because no one would forget that when Yu Zhixian lost her position as young matriarch, she attracted a heavenly fire and burned the most important altar of the goddess clan. Fortunately, the clan's almighty discovered it in time and extinguished the heavenly fire, saving the altar from disaster. But even so, it still caused 100 or so clansmen guarding the altar to be buried in the sea of fire, creating an irreparable disaster. Among them, Xia Jingyu, who had just become the young clan leader, was supposed to be cultivating on the altar that day. However, due to her unwell body, she was not there. Thus, she was able to survive. The original intention was obvious. From then on, Yu Zhixian took advantage of the fact that the higher-ups of the clan didn't have the time to punish her and betrayed the goddess clan. This was a scandal of the goddess clan that hadn't been spread in 100 years. It was announced to the public that Yu Zhixian had gone out to travel, but in reality, only her clansmen knew that Yu Zhixian hadn't gone out to travel, but had betrayed the goddess clan. Otherwise, why would the clan members be so afraid of her if she was only out traveling? What the clansmen couldn't understand was that as a traitor, Yu Zhixian had actually returned to the goddess clan several months ago, accompanied by the higher-ups of the clan. Could it be that the more than 100 clansmen she had burned to death back then had died in vain? Could it be that the hatred of the past was written off just like that? Many of the clansmen objected to this. However, the higher-ups warned the clansmen not to do anything that would harm Yu Zhixian. The clansmen were indignant about this, but they were also extremely helpless. Won't that Xia Jingyu be in the limelight for a while? The corner of Yu Zhixian's mouth hooked into a mocking smile. As the young clan leader, she had to participate in the ancient cave of enchantment. Moreover, there would be many clansmen helping her, and she would obtain unimaginable benefits from it. Many of the clansmen were silent, and no one agreed. Young clan leader, I'll be one of your 7 stars emissaries this time. Me too. There's still me. A group of chattering voices could be heard. He glanced sideways and saw 7 smiling young women dressed in jade green clothes. They were currently surrounding a beautiful woman in an elegant white dress, and they had come to the garden to gather. Her appearance was extremely beautiful, and she blossomed with a brilliance that didn't belong to this world. The sun, moon, and stars merged into one, and the flowers, plants, and trees lost their beauty because of her appearance. She stood there, and even though she didn't move or show any expression, it was enough to suppress all the beautiful things in the world and make them lose their luster. It was as if she was born to be the center of the world, and she possessed an incomparably noble status. There was only one person in the world who could be like this, and that was Xia Jingyu. Yu Zhexian's gaze had long since been fixed on Xia Jingyu. She looked at that familiar and beautiful face that made her jealous, and her heart ached faintly. It was as if she remembered the drastic change that was carved into her bones and heart all those years ago. Xia Jingyu sensed something, and she cast her gaze over. As a result, her elegant brows lightly wrinkled. She had been in seclusion ever since she returned from the last gathering, and she still didn't know that Yu Zhexian had already returned. What? Are you surprised or surprised? Yu Zhexian cast a provocative gaze at her. Xia Jingyu's expression was indifferent, and she was neither happy nor sad. Since you appeared here, there must be a reason for your appearance. Why should I be surprised? In fact, she had never reported to the higher-ups of the clan that Yu Zhexian had done even more excessive things to her. For example, she had tried to drug her unconscious and give her to a man from the outside world to defile her in order to destroy her qualifications to become the young clan leader. Xia Jingyu had unintentionally snatched the position of the young clan leader, and she was originally apologetic. Her heart softened for a moment, and she concealed what she had done. She didn't expect that not only did her concession not reform the other party, but it also brought about an even more severe retaliation, to the extent that more than 100 clansmen were buried in a sea of fire. Yu Zhexian's eyes flickered with coldness. This desireless appearance of yours is really annoying. Back then, you relied on this kind of expression to capture the favor of the higher-ups, right? The clansmen couldn't help but become angry, and they glared at her one after another. The Seven Stars protector even reprimanded in a stern voice, Yu Zhexian, don't go too far. You bastard, you still have the face to mention what happened back then? Traitor, what qualifications do you have to criticize our young clan leader? Yu Zhexian's fierce words attracted the anger of the entire clan, and in the blink of an eye, Yu Zhexian was drowned in their spit. Not only was there no guilt or fear on Yu Zhexian's face, but she even sneered calmly. Yes, I burned 100 clansmen to death, but so what? Do you dare to touch a single hair on my head? The clansmen only dared to be angry, but they didn't dare to say anything. They could only firmly stare at Yu Zhexian. Where was the slightest bit of repentance from her tone? Why would the higher-ups of the clan forgive this kind of person? You don't dare to move, right? A deranged sneer appeared in Yu Zhexian's eyes. Since you don't dare to move, then shut up and don't be noisy. How insolent was her attitude! She turned to look at Xia Jingyu, and she didn't bother to conceal her threat. Young clan leader, I'm afraid you won't be as lucky as before in this ancient cave of enchantment. After she finished speaking, she left with her hands behind her back. Chapter 2948. Yu Zhexian had once used extreme methods in the ancient cave of enchantment and almost caused his death. She was lucky. Yu Zhexian had prepared in a hurry, so she wasn't able to deal a fatal blow, giving her a chance to turn the tables. Now that the other party had made a comeback, he would probably have learned his lesson and would definitely not let this opportunity slip by. Young clan chief, don't worry. We will protect you this time. We will absolutely not let Yu Zhexian have her way, the 7-star bodyguard said. However, the female clansman who had just spoken to Yu Zhexian slightly shook her head. Young clan leader, Yu Zhexian has come prepared this time. You'd better prepare yourself early. Don't count on 7-star bodyguards. Are you questioning our strength? The 7 stars protector frowned. Every 7-star protector was a young peak expert that was carefully selected from the clan. This was because the Heart Enchantment Ancient Cave had an extremely high requirement for one's cultivation age. Only those who had cultivated for 300 years or less had the qualifications to enter. Those who were slightly older than him would be lost in the ancient cave of bewilderment forever, never to return. This was not an exaggeration, but a fact. There were more than one or two great sage-level experts who didn't believe in heresy. However, none of them came back. It was unknown how angry they were. Some people said that they had died in the many dangers of the cave, but others said that they were still lost inside and were still looking for a way out. Therefore, creatures over 300 years old didn't dare to enter. The 7-star guards were young experts selected from living beings below the age of 300. 6 of them had reached Heaven's Tao Lord Intermediate stage, and the last one was on the verge of becoming an ancient sage. He was one of the strongest prodigies of the goddess tribe in many years. Xia Jingyu, on the other hand, was a genius expert who was a mid-stage heavenly Tao Lord. In theory, there was no need to fear the other party. It's not that I'm doubting your strength, but all of you simply don't know what Yu Zhixian experienced during the 100 years she left. After that clansman finished speaking, he closed his mouth as if he was deeply afraid of being implicated. He didn't know what had caused her expression to change like this. Seeing Zhang Xian stammering, the 7-stars guard thought nothing of it. You're boosting the morale of others and diminishing the might of your own. Xia Jingyu, on the other hand, fell into deep thought. She didn't think that the clansman's words were baseless. Jingyu, come here. Suddenly, an old voice came from the garden. Many of the clansmen were shocked. It was the Great Elder. Xia Jingyu did not dare to hesitate. She immediately went to the place where the Great Elder was cultivating in seclusion. Jingyu greets the Great Elder. Xia Jingyu bowed. In the flowering shrubs in front of her sat an old man in a red robe, cultivating. Hearing those words, Zhang Xian immediately stopped his cultivation and revealed an amiable look. You're here. Xia Jingyu nodded, feeling very strange in her heart. Ever since the last gathering at the border, the Great Elder seemed to have changed into a different person. In the past, the Great Elder often spoke coldly to her and often forced her to go to gatherings with men of status. But ever since the last time, not only did he not make any requests, he even rejected all the young elites who came to visit him, not allowing them to harass him. The drastic change left Xia Jingyu scratching her head in confusion. How could she have known that Suyu had threatened the Great Elder with the identity of Heavenly Jewel Mirror, which was why she had changed her mind? Great Elder, what instructions do you have for me? Xia Jingyu asked. The Great Elder's amiable face became much more serious as he said, I'm sure you already know about Yu Zhixian's return. In response, Xia Jingyu nodded. The Great Elder's face was solemn as he said, Yu Zhixian is no longer who she used to be. Even the goddess clan has to be wary of her and dare not offend her. Xia Jingyu's heart sank. Indeed, 100 years had passed. What had Yu Zhixian obtained that made the goddess clan wary of her? We brought her back purely because we had no other choice, the Great Elder said, as if he was explaining to Xia Jingyu, afraid that she would misunderstand. Xia Jingyu said, I understand the clan's difficulties. The goddess clan was just a large family that had been struggling to survive in the cracks all year round. Even though they had once posed a great threat to Suyu, in reality, they were nothing in the 9-star civilizations. Therefore, the goddess clan had always held an attitude of not easily offending other influences. Yu Zhixian's return must have caused the goddess clan a lot of frustration. It's good that you understand. The Great Elder sighed. However, we will not leave her alone. In addition to sending people to keep an eye on her, we will also send 7-star guards to guard you. Xia Jingyu listened quietly. The Great Elder had specially summoned her not just to talk about useless things. In addition, we are also looking for suitable personnel to protect you in the bewitching ancient cave, the Great Elder said seriously. She was not optimistic about the 7-star guards either, so she needed external help. Of course, if you have better personnel, we will consider your request first, the Great Elder said. Xia Jingyu shook her head and said, I will listen to the Great Elder's instructions. She had been in isolation all year round. How could she know better personnel? The Great Elder said, All right, Let us know if you have any requests." After a pause, the great elder took out an invitation and said, "The main hall of the Palace of Heaven has invited us to participate in a bathing ceremony. It is good for improving soul strength. This opportunity is reserved for you. Prepare to leave soon." Xia Jingyu took the invitation and said gratefully, "Thank you, great elder." Her soul was a little weak and needed to be replenished. Back to Suyu. He led the people to the entrance of the 9-star civilization in a mighty manner. One could imagine the grandeur of the scene. The stone men guarding the entrance were all shocked. They thought it was wanderers who had trespassed into the 9-star civilization. However, upon inspection, they were shocked to find that all of them had real documents. Moreover, they were personally issued by the number 1 aristocratic family, the Palace of Heaven. There was no doubt about their identities. Therefore, despite their shock, they could only let them pass. Because of the large number of people, it took them half a month to pass through together. For a while, the entrance was completely blocked. When the last person passed through, all the stone men were exhausted. The giant golden python in the passage had been mostly damaged due to continuous work. "Guards!" The leader of the stone men, the black-robed man who was at the peak of the ancient sage level, yelled, "Inform the Palace of Heaven of what happened here." Yes, Suyu had finally led the people to the 9-star civilization in broad daylight. Feeling the incomparably rich Taoist energy here and the incomparably prosperous world, the people were all excited. Even the wilderness of the 9-star civilization is better than the good spiritual land we used to have. If I were born here, why will my cultivation level be so low? It's not too late now. As long as I train harder, I will definitely be able to break through to the Pathmaster level in my lifetime. All the people were celebrating. They had finally witnessed the legendary 9-star civilization with their own eyes. Chapter 2949. However, this was only the first step. Ding had indeed come to a 9-star civilization, but it did not even have a stronghold. Cauldron Venerable, how about we establish a force here? A middle-ranking Cauldron Venerable suggested. The spiritual chi in this place was indeed something they had never seen before in their lives, and it gave them a huge shock. Suyu's eyes flickered. "This place? Your requirements are too low. What good places does Cauldron Zun have?" The higher-ups asked again, guessing that Suyu might have a better, undiscovered spiritual land. However, if he knew that the entire 9-star civilization had been occupied by countless ancient factions for countless years, and any good spiritual land had already been occupied, there would not be anything left. "I do have a good place to go, but I will need to fight a fierce battle." Suyu's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. He did have a good place to go, and that was the territory of the Sword Sacred Tribe. That place was built in an ancient battlefield that no one could go to. Not only were very few living beings able to step into it and threaten the stronghold, but there were also a few living beings that could enter it. More importantly, since the Sword Sacred Clan had chosen that place as their base, it must be because the spiritual energy there was extremely rare. Think about it, a grotto heaven that was not disturbed by any living beings or dangers, and it was also a rare paradise. Where else in the entire 9-star civilization could find a second one like this? Of course, the most important thing was that the Sword Sacred Clan had been destroyed by the human-shaped tribulation fire, and the clan's vitality had been greatly damaged. It was the best time to take him down. However, now was clearly not the time. None of the 5 great sages of the famed Sword Sacred Clan had perished. If they were to retaliate, the consequences would be unimaginable. For the time being, we will set up camp in the vicinity and don't have any conflicts with any of the nearby factions, Suyu said. We will wait patiently for some time, and when the time comes, we will occupy that place. The Cauldron's members had unlimited trust in Suyu, so they carried out his orders without the slightest doubt. A group of common people immediately set up camp nearby and settled down. Suyu, what do you plan to do next? The sinful lady looked at the vast 9-star civilization and was momentarily stunned, not knowing what to do. Suyu took a deep breath and said, "There are many things that need to be done. Even retrieving the 10,000 Calamity Scythe was a long way off, not to mention rescuing the absolute beginning realm life forms that Xiongqi had taken away. However, there was no need to worry about the 10,000 Calamity Scythe for now. It could sense Su Yu's presence, and the connection between them could not be broken. What was important was the Yin-Yang Gate. According to Bai Shui, only those who had completed the Temple of Heaven's mission were qualified to use the Yin-Yang Gate. In order to accept the mission, the lowest level of strength was an aristocratic family. Let's first appraise the overall strength of our cauldron, Su Yu said. The 9-star civilizations had an organization that specialized in evaluating the strength of a certain group, and that was the Golem Palace. The Golem Palace was a palace controlled by the descendants of the stone-birthed Son of Heaven. It was involved in various cities of the 9-star civilizations. Its purpose was to test the strength of the world's experts. As long as one's strength reached a certain standard, they would receive a reward from the Stone Man Palace. Moreover, the process did not cost them anything. Therefore, many beings from the 9-star civilizations were especially passionate about this. In order for a power to pass the assessment and become an aristocratic family, it had to pass the Golem Palace's test. There were 3 conditions for becoming a noble family. Firstly, the leader had to be at least an ancient sage. Secondly, there had to be at least 3 people who had reached the mid-stage of the Tao of Heaven. Finally, the number of Tao Lords in the faction must be more than 3,000. Only then would they have the qualifications to call themselves an aristocratic family. Not a single one of these conditions could be lacking. None of these 3 conditions could be omitted. Of course, not all 3 conditions could be met to become an aristocratic family. This was because the Golem Palace only allowed one aristocratic family to be established every month. Among all the forces that had passed the assessment that month, the most outstanding would be chosen to become an aristocratic family. Of course, the Cauldron perfectly met all 3 conditions. In particular, the first and third conditions were superior to most of the aristocratic families. Apart from everything else, Su Yu had the absolute strength to kill a great saint with a single stroke of his sword. As for the Pathmasters, there were more than 3,000 of them. Su Yu scanned his surroundings and locked his eyes on the nearest city to him. He led a group of Cauldron members into the city for the test. Such a large group of people entered the city, but they were not affected in the slightest. This was because the city was too vast. 30,000 people entering the city did not cause the slightest ripple. The prosperity of the city was incomparable to the 8-star civilizations of the past. Therefore, the members of the Cauldron were extremely curious about everything and were amazed. When he arrived at the Golem Palace, Su Yu was slightly surprised to find that the Cauldron was not the only force that had come for the additional test. There were already 2 forces waiting outside the Golem Palace, whose doors were tightly shut. Su Yu gave him a cursory glance and frowned. The 2 forces had completely met the standards of the aristocratic families. Whether it was the ancient saints, 3 middle-stage heavenly law masters, or 30,000-strong heavenly law masters, they had far exceeded the requirements. There are so many strong men in the 9-star civilizations, so you could not help but sigh. This was a city that had been randomly chosen, but he had actually encountered 2 forces that had met the requirements to compete for becoming an aristocratic family. The arrival of the Cauldron naturally aroused the vigilance of the 2 great forces. However, when they noticed that most of the members of the 30,000 Cauldron were early-stage heavenly law masters, they heaved a sigh of relief. Moreover, the behavior of the members of the Cauldron looking around curiously had attracted their contempt. Where did this beggar force come from? How dare they come to apply for becoming an aristocratic family? Maybe it's a small faction that got lucky and developed. The 2 forces had a tacit understanding to denigrate the Cauldron together. In the 9-star civilizations, even the aristocratic families had differences in strength. The powerful aristocratic families had the support of great saint-level forces. One of the 2 forces in front of them was a direct relative of the Saint clan. It was a family established by itself and was preparing to be independent. The other force was one of the vassal forces of the Saint clan. With the support of the Saint clan, it was preparing to apply for becoming an aristocratic family. The Cauldron had appeared out of nowhere, and its overall level was relatively low, far inferior to their mysterious force. I say, where do we come from? Why do we need you to talk so much? Suyu was too lazy to argue with them. However, it did not mean that the members of the Cauldron could take it lying down. Hey! The members of the two great forces immediately cast a threatening look at him. Where did this wild monk come from? How dare he behave atrociously in Tianzhou City? Perhaps you should find out who we are? I advise you to give up as soon as possible. Don't waste your energy. They obviously wanted to exclude the Cauldron to reduce the competition. Chapter 2950. Of course we are ready. The leaders of the two forces looked solemn, then looked at Suyu with a faint smile. But we don't know if they are ready. The person who opened the door of the Stone Man Palace was expressionless. What do you need to say if they are ready? After suffering a setback, the leaders of the two factions immediately shut their mouths obediently with embarrassed expressions. The Stone Man Palace was not just any other place. It was the land of Ho-E, the son of the Holy Mountain. If they caused trouble here, it was very likely that the son of the Holy Mountain would hear about it. If the son of the Holy Mountain showed any dissatisfaction, what awaited them would be a doomsday-like execution. Therefore, they immediately behaved themselves and did not dare to act rashly. They did not even dare to look at Suyu casually, for fear of incurring the dissatisfaction of the Stone Man Palace. Are you ready? The person who opened the door asked again. Suyu said calmly, Yes, we are ready. The Stone Man nodded. Come in. The door of the Stone Man Palace opened completely. The three forces, guided by the Stone Man, washed up and entered the Great Hall. The Stone Man Palace was self-contained, but it was not huge. There was only a huge stone platform that could accommodate tens of thousands of people. There was a huge statue of a stone man on the stone platform. Judging from the statue, it was none other than Prince Xiaoyao. Staring at the gloomy stone statue, Suyu's eyes slowly narrowed. Among the 10 great emperors of the Holy Mountain, he had the deepest grudge with Prince Xiaoyao. He had sent his doppelgangers to kill Suyu twice. However, it was a pity that Suyu managed to evade the deadly pursuit again and again. Moreover, he even managed to destroy both of the opponent's clones. So far, his first doppelganger had not been successfully restored. One could imagine the deep hatred between the two sides. To be honest, Suyu was a little worried that the test might not be a smooth one at the Stone Man Palace where his statue was erected. As you can see, the test is divided into 3 stages. The first stage is the test of the Master of the Heavenly Law. All 30,000 people must reach the level of the Master of the Heavenly Law, not one missing. The other 2 forces indicated that there was no problem. Suyu's eyes flashed, and he nodded confidently. Okay, let's start with the King of Hell, the Stone Man said indifferently. The so-called King of Hell was the vassal force of the Holy Clan. Their strength completely met the requirements of the great families. Under the leader's command, the 30,000 examinees came to the arena one after another. Before the test, let me warn you first. If your strength hasn't reached the level of a Heavenly Law Lord, you'd better step down. Otherwise, your life will be in danger once the test begins. The leader of the Netherworld Kings hesitated for a moment before gritting his teeth and saying, There's absolutely no problem. The golem nodded and said, Okay, let the test begin. With a command, purple flames immediately appeared around the ring. Upon seeing this item, the 30,000 members of the Netherworld Kings Association who were waiting to be tested couldn't help but panic. The Heavenly Law Master's Flame. The so-called Heavenly Law Master's Flame was somewhat similar to the Heavenly Flame that appeared when Suyu broke through to the Heavenly Law Master level. It was just that the power would undoubtedly be much stronger. An expert like Dao, Lord Fei Tian, would not be able to withstand it. It seemed that not all of them were masters of the Heavenly Law. There was still a certain proportion of them who were imposters. The Nether King signaled them with his eyes to calm them down. Only then did the panicking crowd quietly calm down. They definitely understood the danger of the power assessment. Since they dared to come, they must have made preparations. They quickly calmed down and huddled close to each other. At that moment, the Heavenly Law Master's flame had already spread, burning the whole ring. The masters of the heavenly law immediately groaned in pain. Even though they were masters of the heavenly law, enduring the heavenly law flame was still excruciating. Even they were in pain, let alone those whose cultivation hadn't reached the level of a master of the heavenly law. To them, this was a devastating injury. One of them, who hadn't reached the level of master of the heavenly law, was immediately set ablaze and turned into a flaming man. This was the result of being injured by the heavenly flame because his cultivation hadn't reached the standard. However, just as he was about to be burned to ashes, the heavenly flame became much weaker. It turned out that a part of it had been absorbed by his companions who were next to him. His companion was the master of the heavenly law, so absorbing part of the heavenly flame wouldn't cause him much harm. Moreover, there was more than one master of the heavenly law beside the flaming man. His companions were all absorbing the heavenly flame, which minimized the damage they had suffered. As expected, with the help of his companions, the heavenly flame on this person's body was completely absorbed, and he was spared from death. In fact, there were more than 30,000 people in the ring. At least thousands of them had not reached the level of a master of the heavenly law, and they had relied on this cheating method to achieve great success. When a netherworld king saw this, a hint of delight appeared on his face. As expected, they had completely understood the testing method of the ring. Many forces had relied on this method to become powerful families. After all, it wasn't easy to gather 30,000 masters of the heavenly law. Therefore, they had to use some improper methods. However, just as the netherworld king was feeling happy, a sudden change occurred. The heavenly flame on the ring suddenly erupted with power, which was twice as powerful as before. Many of the examiners were caught off guard, and they were immediately engulfed by the incomparably fierce heavenly flame. The power of this fire was so strong that even the real master of the heavenly law had reached his limit. He couldn't even take care of himself, let alone help others. Those powerhouses whose cultivation hadn't reached the level of a master of the heavenly law were immediately set ablaze. For a moment, screams filled the air. The sudden eruption of the heavenly flame quickly calmed down, leaving behind a pile of ashes. For the 5,000 fake masters of the heavenly law were all burned to ashes. The netherworld king stood rooted to the ground, and his mind went blank. How could this be? Didn't they verify countless times that the Golem Palace could indeed use this method to cheat? Why did the heavenly flame suddenly erupt? At that moment, the stone man said expressionlessly, "I forgot to tell you that the heavenly flame on the ring has changed." Looking at the dazed netherworld king, the stone man announced, "Netherworld king, you have failed the test. You can't meet the requirements of a powerful family." Everyone felt uneasy after witnessing this scene. The cauldron was the most uneasy one. How could they not know how powerful the cauldron was? Where could they find 30,000 masters of the heavenly law? They didn't even have 30 of them, let alone 30,000. This was the cauldron's current situation. It didn't have enough masters of the heavenly law. The sinful woman couldn't help but worry for Suyu. Others couldn't even cheat if they were only a few thousand masters of the heavenly law, let alone them. However, Suyu was still as calm as before. He said, "Different situations call for different actions. I have my ways. Don't be impatient." The members of the cauldron forced themselves to calm down and observe the situation quietly. Chapter 29:51. Hearing this, the previously arrogant and despotic force immediately felt guilty. The netherworld king lacked enough heaven law masters, but so did he. It was just that he didn't lack 5,000 heaven law masters like the netherworld king. The leader of the opposing force gritted his teeth and said, "Then let me, Ling Yun, do it." He was a direct descendant of a sacred clan, so he naturally had more resources than the former. Ling Yun's members panicked, and about 1,000 of them became nervous and uneasy. If the Netherworld King's 5,000 members were annihilated so easily, how could they dare to go up? "With me, Qing Mu, here, what are you afraid of?" Qing Mu shouted. Ling Yun's members had no choice but to go up. All 30,000 of them stood on the arena. The stone man said expressionlessly, "I repeat, the first test is very dangerous. Any injuries or deaths will be at your own risk. Qingmu nodded and said, Ling Yun understands. Please. The stone man nodded and activated the mechanism of the arena. Instantly, the Heaven Law Master's flames started to spread around the arena. The 30,000 members took in a deep breath. Unlike the Netherworld King, the members of Ling Yun's team were spread out as if they weren't cheating at all. At this moment, the heavenly fire finally spread over and engulfed everyone at an extremely fast speed. About 1,000 of them were immediately engulfed in flames, turning them into burning men. However, the strange thing was that they didn't feel any pain. Instead, they acted as if nothing had happened. After burning for a while, the heavenly fire on their bodies was automatically absorbed into their bodies. On the other hand, the other 290,000 people had painful expressions on their faces, and their bodies were faintly red. If one looked closely, they would find that there were wooden patterns on their bodies, as if they were all tree stumps. It turned out that this was the divine ability of the sacred clan that Qingmu belonged to. It could lignify all nearby objects and living beings, and form a cohesive whole. The 30,000 people were like an ancient tree with 30,000 roots. 1,000 of them were affected by the heaven fire, and they could immediately spread it to the other 29,000 people. This way, the power of the heaven fire could be spread to the other 29,000 people. This method was undoubtedly many times more powerful than the Netherworld King's method of sharing the heaven fire. Soon, the heaven fire in the 20,000 people's bodies was extinguished. Apart from some slight pain, they didn't suffer any injuries. However, what followed was the violent eruption of the Heavenly Law Master's fire. The 1,000 people were once again burned by the terrifying heavenly fire. Before it could harm them, the heavenly fire was swiftly distributed by the others, and it was clear that the pores of everyone else were leaking weak embers of fire. Their expressions were quite painful, but it wasn't to the point where they couldn't bear it. Finally, even though the heavenly flame erupted violently, it also left quickly. In the blink of an eye, all of the Heavenly Law Master's flames disappeared. None of the 30,000 people were injured. Greenwood excitedly clenched his fists. Success! He suppressed his excitement and looked at the golem. The golem announced expressionlessly, Ling Yun passed the first test. Even though he could tell that Ling Yun had cheated, the test rules didn't prohibit such cheating methods. Moreover, Greenwood was a descendant of a large Saint clan, so he could only pretend that he didn't see anything. Great! Greenwood was incomparably excited, and he couldn't help but laugh. This month's great family clan is mine, Ling Yun. As he spoke, he looked at the Nether King beside him. The latter's expression was gloomy. He was already in low spirits. Being stared at by Ling Yun, he felt even more ashamed and embarrassed. However, when he looked at Su Yu and the others beside him, he felt much better. After all, the Nether King wasn't at the bottom, so it wasn't that embarrassing. Later, it would be this motley crew that came out of nowhere who would be embarrassed. Judging from their composition, there weren't many strong Heavenly Law Masters among them. How could they have the courage to come and take the great family clan test? Who gave them the courage to do so? Greenwood also looked confident. He now felt that it was a waste of time for Su Yu's people to take the test. There was no need at all. It was obvious that almost no one was qualified to be the Heavenly Law Master. However, in the Golem Palace, he didn't dare to say anything. He could only stand calmly under the arena, waiting for the second test to begin. Are you ready? The Golem looked at Su Yu and the others. He was also puzzled. In the past, there had been ungrateful people who had come to take the test in an attempt to bluff their way through. However, after witnessing the cruelty of the test, many wisely withdrew. On the other hand, Su Yu was still calm and insisted on taking the test. Go up. Su Yu waved his hand, and an invisible trail appeared, fusing into the bodies of the 30,000 Cauldron's members. They stepped forward anxiously. If it weren't for their absolute trust in Su Yu, they wouldn't have dared to come up. Previously, the 5,000 members of the Netherworld King had been killed in an instant, which was a heavy blow to their souls. The crowd lined up together, feeling anxious and fearful. Begin, the golem said quietly as he looked at them with a sigh. The Netherworld King had only been short of 5,000 people, yet he had still ended up in such a miserable state. How could this motley crew fare? In a moment, no one would be able to remain in the arena. All of them would be reduced to ashes. Greenwood and the Nether King looked on calmly, as if they could already see the miserable fate of the 30,000 people screaming in pain. Buzz! Buzz! Intense, heavenly law fire immediately appeared around the arena. Even though it was far away, the members of the cauldrons on the arena felt an intense burning pain on their skin. As the heavenly fire approached, the burning pain became more and more intense. Finally, the heavenly fire engulfed everyone with a heaven-devouring momentum. However, the strange thing was that none of them felt any pain. The heavenly fire was burning on their bodies, but none of them felt any pain. Even the burning pain they had felt before was slowly disappearing, replaced by warmth. Greenwood and the Nether King were not the only ones who were shocked by this scene. Even the golem was shocked. With his cultivation level, how could he not see that the heavenly law master was not among them? However, how did they withstand the heavenly law master's flames? It was unbelievable. Upon closer inspection, the golem finally discovered that there was a faint flickering trace on their bodies. When the heavenly law master's flames approached, they were bounced off by an invisible force, unable to cause any harm to them. What is this? The golem was a little uncertain. Soon, the second wave of heavenly fire, which was even more violent, erupted. It was this heavenly fire that killed 5,000 members of the Netherworld King in an instant. The heavenly fire engulfed them all. However, to their great shock, they saw a clear remnant mark hovering above the heads of the 30,000 people, which absorbed all the heavenly fire that fell on them, leaving nothing behind. Chapter 2952. If he was not mistaken, this was the ancestral technique of the Star Clan, which had been destroyed by the sun of the Holy Mountain because it had rebelled with the 8-star civilizations a century ago. The ancestral technique of the Star Clan had the ability to shift the position of the stars, which could shift the enemy's attack elsewhere. The more advanced the ancestral technique was, the more powerful the shift would be. Generally speaking, the Star Clan, who had trained to a high level, could shift the attack of a peak Pathmaster. Only the Star Clan, who had trained to a high level, could shift the attack of a Heaven Law Master. However, Suyu didn't teleport just one Heaven's Law Master's attack, but more than 30,000 of them. Just how profound must one's cultivation be to be able to achieve such a feat? He remembered that only a few elders of the Star Clan had been able to do that. Are you a member of the Star Clan? The Stone Man's eyes sharpened, but he did not question him. It had been an entire era. When the Star Clan was destroyed, the Xiaoyao Son of Heaven had said that the matter had come to an end. There is no need for him to blame his descendants for what had happened an era ago. Moreover, it was still unknown whether Suyu was a descendant of the Star Clan or not. No, Suyu replied calmly. Then he asked, "Did we pass the first test?" The Stone Man looked at Suyu and said, "Passed. My lord." The Nether King stepped forward immediately and said angrily, "My lord, this is ridiculous." Anyone with a discerning eye could see that there were not even a few Heaven Law Masters in Suyu's faction. How could such a faction pass the first test? Was this a joke? I strongly suggest that we disqualify them from the test, the Nether King said through clenched teeth. Why? If the Cauldron could pass the test, then what about his dead brothers? The Stone Man was expressionless. He said coldly, "Who gave you the courage to question my judgment?" Upon hearing that, the Nether King shivered. He lowered his head and said weakly, "But they cheated." The Stone Man snorted coldly. "Didn't you cheat? Don't blame others for your inferiority. Get lost. We won't be tested by the Nether King within 100 years. The Nether King's heart trembled, and his face turned pale. If they couldn't be tested within 100 years, wouldn't that mean that they had lost all hope? He had planned to rebuild his strength within 10 years and find enough masters of the heavenly law. Now, everything was ruined. Human, just you wait. The Nether King stared at Suyu fiercely, his eyes filled with hatred. Suyu was baffled and asked, "What does that have to do with me?" She actually hated him for no reason at all. Suyu did not provoke him at all. On the contrary, it was the other party who frequently provoked him, and Suyu had always restrained himself. But, in the end, it was his own incompetence that caused great casualties and failure, and he blamed Suyu for it. Humph continued to be stubborn. The Nether King vented his anger. Suyu's eyes turned cold, and he said, "Then wait outside." This was really looking for the King of Hell in the middle of the night. Hey! The Nether King's eyes widened, and a murderous aura erupted from him. A motley crew dared to provoke him? It seemed like the first group test had failed. The Netherworld King was looked down upon. All right, then you better pray that you didn't die in the Stoneman Palace. Otherwise, I will make you wish you were dead. The Nether King swung his sleeves and left. Suyu retracted his gaze, and his eyes became cold. If the tripod really became a great family, it might not be a bad thing to destroy a force at the beginning of its establishment. When all of the Nether King's forces had left, the Stoneman Palace finally quieted down. The Stone Man looked at the remaining two parties and said, "The second round of testing will test the strong men whose cultivation has reached the middle stage of the Heavenly Law Master. Make sure there are at least 3 of them." Qingmu's expression flickered slightly, and he looked a little guilty. The middle stage of the Heavenly Law Master was not so easy to achieve. Among the millions of strong men in the early stage of the Heavenly Law, there might not even be one middle stage existence. Ling Yun could barely gather 30,000 strong men in the early stage of the Heavenly Law, let alone 3 middle stage ones. Fortunately, he had relied on his family's connections to get 3 masters of the Heavenly Law from his family to keep up appearances, so it should work. The testing process will be more dangerous than the first round. You better think about it carefully, the Stone Man said expressionlessly. Qingmu was really hesitant. After the first round of testing, it was obvious that the testing process had been strengthened several times. If they were not careful, even the strong men in the middle stage of the Heavenly Law Master might die. However, considering that they were strong men from the family, it should not be a problem. Ling Yun will press forward. The Stone Man nodded and looked at Suyu. Suyu said quietly, "We have no problem either. However, I have 2 companions who are still on their way. I need to go and greet them." The Stone Man frowned and said, "After the testing, Ling Yun will wait for you for an hour at most." "That's enough," Suyu said. He waved his hand and asked the sinful girl to follow him out. When they were outside the Stoneman Palace, the sinful girl finally expressed her anxiety. Where are we going to turn into 3 middle stage Heavenly Law Masters? She, who was the strongest among them, had only reached the threshold of the middle stage of the Heavenly Law Master. However, she could only be counted as one. As the leader of the Cauldron, Suyu had to participate in the last round of testing. He could not participate in the second round. "Come here." Suyu brought her to a nearby alley. In the dark alley, one could not even see their own fingers. "Protect me," Suyu said. The sinful girl nodded and immediately performed her divine technique. A dark and gloomy energy condensed in the entire alley, isolating it from the outside world. Then, Suyu weaved signs with his hands, and a powerful time realm was released with him as the center. 2 space-time gates appeared at the same time, and a Suyu walked out from each of them. Both Suyus were men. One of them was younger than Suyu, and the other was slightly more mature. "I thought you had forgotten about us," the 2 Suyus said in unison. They were the incarnations of Suyu's future and past. Without saying a word, Suyu threw a black robe to each of them and said, "Don't show your true appearance." The 2 of them were telepathically connected with Suyu's real body, so they naturally understood what Suyu wanted to do. The future incarnation smiled. "My real body. This kind of cheating is not a wise move." Suyu naturally understood what he was thinking. He said, "It's just a temporary measure. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." The future incarnation meant that it was not wise to cheat and give the Cauldron a position that did not match its status. In that case, the Cauldron would inevitably participate in the competition with the aristocratic families. Once Suyu was gone, the Cauldron would suffer a destructive blow and be easily destroyed. Chapter 2953. Blue veins popped out, on Su Yu's forehead. She had touched his sore spot. He rolled his eyes at the incarnation and finally looked at the sinful lady. After pondering for a while, he raised his hand and waved. Several remnant marks appeared and hovered above her head. "What is this?" the sinful lady asked in surprise. Su Yu said, "3 remnant marks of the ancestor technique of the Saint clan. They are auxiliary, defensive, and offensive marks." The sinful lady said hesitantly, "Since my strength is at the middle stage of the great heavenly path master, I don't need them. Besides, 3 remnant marks can easily expose something and attract unnecessary trouble." Su Yu had also thought of this. "If you get hurt, I will feel bad." Su Yu sighed. After coming to the 9-star civilization, the sinful lady had followed Su Yu without any ambition. How could Su Yu let the sinful lady take risks for him? It's just a normal test. There should be no problem. The sinful lady was moved and had a strange feeling. It was as if there was a sweet taste in her heart. Su Yu's expression became serious, and he shook his head slightly. "No. From the many changes in the first round of testing, I can infer that there will be changes in the second round as well. It may put your life in danger." Su Yu was worried. It's better to be safe. He still didn't know what the second round of testing would be like. He had to be cautious. As for his 2 incarnations, he didn't have to worry at all. Su Yu knew how strong he was. After getting ready, the 4 of them returned to the Stone Man Palace. Just then, the 3 examiners of Lingyun had entered the arena. The 3 of them stood there motionless like wooden stakes. Their eyes were closed, and they were sweating profusely. What was more terrifying was that there were unknown wounds on their bodies. They didn't attack anyone, but their bodies began to be injured. Su Yu's pupils shrank slightly. He knew the second round of testing wouldn't be easy. Suddenly, a scream was heard. One of them opened his eyes, which were full of fear and pain. His whole body was dripping with blood, especially his chest, where there was a huge bloody hole running through his body. Theoretically, he should have died. Strangely, when he woke up, the wound on his chest, which should have been fatal, healed a lot, leaving him half dead. As for the other 2, they persisted until a ding sound came from the arena. The 2 of them seemed to have woken up from a dream, but their expressions were especially tense, as if they had just been in a life-and-death battle. Greenwood was stunned. Unexpected, everything was unexpected. In the past, the second round of examination only determined the overall cultivation of the examinee by attacking some puppets. However, the improved second round was actually a dream test. Moreover, the damage suffered in the dream could be returned to the original body. The stone man put his hands in his sleeves and said expressionlessly, "One person has been eliminated. There are less than 3 middle-stage masters of the heavenly law. The test has failed." Greenwood's heart trembled, and he tried to explain, "Sir, my subordinate's cultivation has indeed reached the middle stage of the heavenly Tao Lord realm. This test is too unfair." The golem said indifferently, "Whether or not you reach it doesn't depend on your cultivation, but your overall strength." He seemed to have seen through Greenwood, and his gaze became much sharper. There are some special methods that can temporarily raise one's cultivation to the middle stage of the heavenly law lord, but their strength may not be able to keep up. As a mid-stage lord of the heaven Tao, not only did his cultivation have to keep up, but he also had to improve his various domains and divine techniques. The master of the Tao of heaven, who relied on cheating and forcefully ascended to the middle stage, did not have such an ability. Hearing this, Greenwood guiltily averted his gaze. The person who had been eliminated had relied on a special method to barely reach the middle stage of the heavenly law lord. If it was in the past, it would have been easy, but now it was impossible. After examining them, the stone man looked at Su Yu. "Are your people ready?" Su Yu gave the sinful woman and the other 2 a look, then they quietly went up the stage. "Wait, why are there 2 of your people who can't show their faces?" Greenwood asked. Su Yu asked, "Is there a rule that forbids them from concealing their true appearances?" What a joke. Among the 3 people who tested Lingyun just now, weren't there 2 members from the Holy Clan who tried to hide him? Why did he feel that something was wrong when it came to others? "No. However, since you've cheated in the past, I think it's better for you to show your true face, Greenwood said coldly. Suyu chuckled. Why do you care? Just stand aside. You. Greenwood's eyes flickered with hostility, but he didn't finish his sentence because the stone man looked at him coldly. Shut up. He looked at Suyu again, but didn't mention the two people in black robes. Instead, he announced the rules. The second round of examination is life-threatening, so you must consider it carefully. If you suffer a simple fatal attack during the examination, the damage will be halved after you wake up. However, if your soul is destroyed in the dream, or your body is destroyed and you can't wake up, then you can't be saved. The person who failed just now had his heart destroyed in the dream, but he woke up in time, so his life wasn't in danger. The sinful woman said calmly, Let's begin. The three of them stood side by side on the stage and slowly closed their eyes. Her vision was plunged into darkness, but it suddenly brightened. However, the sinful woman knew that it wasn't because she had opened her eyes, but because she had quickly entered a dream. When she opened her eyes again, the sinful woman found a person who looked exactly like her standing in front of her. No, to be exact, even their souls were exactly the same. Only their temperaments were different. The other person's temperament was more graceful and elegant, but also more indifferent and ruthless. It was as if she was an existence that ruled over the 9 heavens. She stood there, looked at the sinful woman quietly, and said mercilessly, How can a vessel appear in front of me? Her identity was self-evident. She was Mirror Flower Heaven. However, this wasn't the real Mirror Flower Heaven, but an illusion created by the sinful woman's subconscious. Whatever a person was most afraid of would appear in the dream. Although she had never told anyone about it, the person she was most afraid of was undoubtedly Mirror Flower Heaven, who had used her as a vessel. The sinful woman's pupils shrank, and a rare look of fear appeared on her face. Her body couldn't help but shiver. In the past, she might have continued to be afraid. But now, as Suyu's figure appeared in her mind, she somehow calmed down and felt that it wouldn't matter even if she died now. If she died for Suyu, she wouldn't be afraid of dying. Her eyes suddenly became sharp, and she pulled out the sinful sword. She said, It's just a product of a dream. With a sweep of the sinful sword, the strength of the middle stage of the Heaven Law Master erupted. Mirror Flower Heaven smiled faintly, then disappeared. Then, the sinful woman's vision went black, and her consciousness returned. She opened her eyes in confusion, and her face was full of surprise. Did she pass just like that? Only 1 or 2 breaths had passed, right? But when she opened her eyes, she found that her whole body was drenched in sweat, and at least a cup of tea's time had passed in the outside world. You can actually wake up from the dream on your own. Not bad. The stone man praised her, which was rare. The rest of the examinees waited for the test time to be up, and then they were forcibly brought out of the dream. Suyu didn't expect that the first one to succeed would be the sinful woman, who was the weakest, and not his 2 clones. Chapter 2954. The expressions of the 2 clones were extremely strange. Their bodies were covered with hideous wounds, and blood was flowing freely. Obviously, they had suffered serious injuries in their dreams. However, there was not much fear on their faces. Instead, there was only a complex expression. It was 30% pain, 30% shame, and 30% grief. It was as if they were going through some kind of excruciating torture. Suyu, what happened to them? After the sinful lady got off the stage, she was surprised to find that she had succeeded before Suyu's 2 clones. No one knew better than her how powerful Suyu's 2 clones were. Moreover, the expressions of the 2 clones were too strange. Hearing this, Suyu closed his eyes slightly, and a bitter taste spread in his mouth. Wait patiently, I believe in myself. No one knew him better than he did. Suyu could imagine what the 2 clones had encountered in their dreams. In his life, there is only one person who could make him feel pain, shame, and sorrow. It was Qin Xiener, the woman he had let down the most, and felt the deepest guilt. As expected, the 2 clones had the same scene in their dreams. In the dream, a woman was holding a long blade, tears streaming down her face. Why did you let me down? Why? Suyu's clone stood motionless, allowing her to hurt him. His eyes were staring at Qin Xian'er with a complicated expression. Puff! A sword pierced through Su Yu's chest. Su Yu did not even frown, but the sorrow in his eyes deepened. Brother Yu, I have always treated you with sincerity. Why did you betray me? Qin Xian'er pulled out her sword, and blood splattered everywhere. Tears still stained her face. She said, You still love Xia Jingyu, don't you? After so many years, you still haven't forgotten her. But I'm your wife. Do you even put me in your eyes? Looking at her tearful accusation, Su Yu did not say a word. Moreover, why didn't you save me? Why did you let me die in the hands of the ancient god Jiulong? Why? She clutched her heart and cried, My heart hurts. It really hurts. As she spoke, Qin Xian'er's face was filled with murderous intent. She stabbed her sword again, and this time, it was aimed at Xia Qingchen's heart. If you feel guilty, if you feel that you have wronged me, then you can atone for it with your life. The long sword was like a rainbow, and it immediately pointed at Su Yu's heart. If nothing unexpected happened, Su Yu would still not block it, just like the previous dozen sword strikes. However, this time, when the tip of the sword was about to reach Su Yu's chest, Su Yu finally moved. He raised his finger and gently blocked the sharp tip of the sword. Qin Xian'er suddenly raised her head and said, Why should I hide? What right do you have to hide? The complicated look on Su Yu's face gradually disappeared. There was no more pain, no more shame, only sorrow. The real Xian'er won't harm me, Su Yu said in a hoarse voice. He was the only one in Xian'er's life, and she placed him first. How could she hurt him? How could she kill him? When Su Yu first saw Xian'er in his dreams, he came back to his senses and knew who she was. She just wanted to see Qin Xian'er again and listen to her voice. That was all. How do you know? You've done so many wrong things to her. Don't you think you deserve to die? Qin Xian'er stepped back. Her eyes and voice became unfamiliar. Su Yu moved his body and said, So, this is why I didn't kill you. He knew that Qin Xian'er wouldn't hold a grudge against him because of Xia Jingyu. He also knew that Qin Xian'er wouldn't blame him for not saving her before she died. Even in the most painful years of her life, she still hoped for Su Yu's well-being instead of hatred. However, Su Yu blamed himself. The more Qin Xian'er acted this way, the more Su Yu felt guilty. So, he quietly listened to the fake Qin Xian'er vent her hatred. Now, she had finished listening. So what? Can you bear to kill me? Qin Xian'er seemed to have seen through Su Yu. She was not afraid. Instead, she raised her head and said, Come on, try to kill me. Anyway, you've wronged me all your life. You won't feel any guilt killing me. Su Yu stepped forward and said calmly, I'm very grateful that you let me see Qin Xian'er again and hear her voice again. However, that doesn't mean you can humiliate Xian'er as you wish. A gust of wind blew from the tip of his foot, and a wisp of the powerful energy of a middle-stage master of the heavenly law charged forward. Qin Xian'er's face gradually became calm. She didn't resist, but said calmly, You passed. Then, she was destroyed by the strong wind and turned into dust. The two clones woke up almost at the same time, and their injuries healed. However, their eyes were still filled with sadness. The future clone walked down and said, Main body, don't let Xian'er wait for too long. You owe her too much. Su Yu nodded silently. How could he not understand that he owed Xian'er? He raised his head and looked at the stone man. How was it? Did we pass? The stone man looked at the sinful lady and the two clones meaningfully. He knew very well how dangerous the second round of the test was. Compared to the first round, it didn't just test one's strength, but also one's temperament. If one's temperament wasn't up to par, it was highly likely that one would die in it. Since the beginning of the test, no force had ever successfully passed it. He didn't expect that the Cauldron, who looked mediocre, would actually pass the test. It was really unexpected. He nodded slightly and said, The second round of the test is a success. Qing Mu, who was beside him, couldn't believe it. He asked, How did you cheat? He couldn't accept that a force that didn't even have a few masters of the heavenly law could pass the test. So you calmly looked at him and said, Next is the third round of the test. Those who are not involved should leave so that they don't affect my performance. Qing Mu clenched his teeth and was about to scold him when the stone man said, "You have already failed the second round of the test. If you don't leave now, do you want me to personally ask you to leave?" Since the stone man had spoken, Qing Mu could only bow and cup his fists. Yes, Ling Yun will leave now. If this stalemate continued, he would end up like the Netherworld King. He wouldn't be able to participate in the test for hundreds of years. However, before he left, he glared at Su Yu fiercely, like the Netherworld King. Although he didn't blame Su Yu for his failure, he didn't hold back either. In the end, only the cauldron was left. The stone man stared at Su Yu. To be honest, he didn't expect the weakest force to successfully make it to the last round. Instead, Ling Yun, whom he had been most optimistic about, had been defeated in the second round of the test. All right, the third round is to test the strength of the leader. You must be at the level of an ancient saint. Are you ready? The stone man's expression was solemn. Su Yu looked at the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao on the arena. This stone statue hadn't been used at all. Chapter 2955. As if noticing Su Yu's gaze, the stone man said, "As you can see, that is the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao. Among the 10 emperors, he represents destruction. Indeed, among the 10 emperors of the Holy Mountain, only Prince Xiaoyao was active in the world, leading the destruction of various civilizations in the Great Beginning Realm. In contrast, the other 9 emperors had never set foot in the world. It was not an exaggeration to say that Prince Xiaoyao represented destruction. The third test is the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao. You'll fight with it. Imagine the danger," the stone man said. "It's not too late to back out now. When the test really starts, I won't be able to stop it." Hearing this, Su Yu's expression was indifferent. "No need, let's begin." He had fought with the clone of Prince Xiaoyao many times. How could he deal with a mere stone statue? The stone man was silent for a moment, then frowned slightly. "Think carefully." Su Yu looked at him and said meaningfully, "You are very long-winded." Intuition told Su Yu that there was something wrong with this stone man. Was the previous test not dangerous? Did he remind him again and again? No. Judging from the cruelty of the test, the Stone Man Palace did not care about the life of the examinee at all. Now, he was curious and concerned about the examinee's safety, repeatedly reminding Su Yu to back out. Who would believe that there was no problem? You don't know what's good for you. The stone man snorted and waved his sleeves. Since you want to die, go ahead. The stone man pressed his palm on the arena, leaving a palm print on it. A strange scene appeared. Traces of blood seeped out from the print. The blood quickly spread throughout the entire arena, turning it into a sea of blood. The stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao, which had been motionless all this time, finally moved. It automatically absorbed the blood and gathered all the blood on its body, turning it into a layer of bloody clothes. The stone statue's face was already gloomy. After being covered with a layer of bloody clothes, it looked even more gloomy, like a man-eating demon. Crack! Suddenly, several cracks appeared on the face of the stone statue. The stone skin around the eyes suddenly peeled off, revealing 2 dark red eyes that were constantly moving. Then, the stone skin around the mouth, nose, and ears all broke off, revealing dark golden skin. Are you prepared to die for challenging me? The stone statue of Xiaoyao, son of heaven, asked indifferently. Su Yu slowly stepped onto the stage, calmly saying, "A stone statue does not deserve to be so insolent." The stone statue of Emperor Xiaoyao turned around and looked at Su Yu. His dark red eyes were filled with confusion, a feeling of déjà vu. "We have met before," the stone statue of Xiaoyao, son of heaven, said slowly. Even though Su Yu had a custom-made black robe to cover his figure, it still could not block the perception of the stone statue of Emperor Xiaoyao. Su Yu clenched his fist and pulled out an illusory sword formed by the absolute heaven sword. Its might was not even 1/10,000th of the real one. He said lightly, "It has indeed been a while." To be precise, he had seen the clone of Prince Xiaoyao in the famous Sword Saint tribe, but it did not notice Su Yu. Upon hearing this, the stone man could not help but be shocked. and he stared at Su Yu in surprise. This human actually met Xiao Yao, son of heaven, before. The stone statue of Emperor Xiao Yao had a weak connection with Emperor Xiao Yao himself, and they could sense each other. Since the stone statue said that it had seen him before, it must have been the feeling conveyed by the real body. However, the stone man could not figure out why the high and mighty Xiao Yao, son of heaven, would have any connection with this lowly dust that needed to establish a small family. There should not be any connection between the two. So, you have come to challenge me. Do you have the consciousness of returning to the void? The dark red eyes of the stone statue of Emperor Xiao Yao turned to look at Su Yu. Su Yu held the illusory absolute heaven sword formed by the absolute heaven sword, and without saying a word, he slashed at the stone statue. Although the power of this sword was not as good as the real absolute heaven sword, it was not something that an ancient saint strongman could withstand. The sword energy, which was almost tangible, could completely destroy the stone statue of an ancient saint if there were no accidents. At the very least, it should be seriously injured. However, the stone statue of Emperor Xiao Yao showed a hint of mockery. It stood motionless on the spot, allowing the sword energy to attack its body. As a result, with a clang, the sword energy was completely blocked, as if it had attacked an extremely hard iron block. Even the stone clothes on the surface of the stone statue were not damaged. The people below the stage could see that something was wrong. The sinful lady squinted her eyes and said in a serious voice, "What's going on? Shouldn't the overall strength of the stone statue be similar to that of an ancient saint?" However, Su Yu's sword attack just now had almost reached the peak of the ancient saint level, yet it could not hurt him at all. Was this a joke? The stone man, who was the judge, showed an expression of "I warned you," and said calmly, "Who said the strength of the stone statue of Emperor Xiao Yao must be at the ancient saint level? Its function is to test the strength of the examinee." The sinful lady asked, "This is too unfair. What if the stone statue of Emperor Xiao Yao used too much force?" It was obvious that the stone statue of Emperor Xiao Yao had its own wisdom. It completely decided how much force it used. If it used a little more force, even the strongest ancient saint would not be able to pass. If it used a little less force, even if its strength was not at the ancient saint level, it could still pass the test. This round of testing was too unfair. Moreover, it could be imagined that this was definitely a situation that had happened recently. Su Yu really did not know what the Stone Man Palace was planning. Why did they have to make the test so difficult and unpredictable? It was as if they sincerely did not want people to pass the test. The Stone Man shrugged with a smile. If you think it is unfair, you can choose not to participate. You can choose to give up. The sinful lady clenched her fists, feeling extremely humiliated. On the arena, Su Yu was expressionless. He did not have any emotional fluctuations. Even his doppelganger had been destroyed by him, let alone a mere stone statue. He looked at the stone statue with pity and said, "You really should not have met me." As he spoke, he waved his finger. A trace track appeared immediately and quickly bombarded the body of the stone statue. Crack! Under the effect of the ancestral technique, the stone clothes on the surface of the indestructible stone statue finally shattered with a loud bang. However, what was shattered was only the stone skin on its body. A golden stone statue appeared in front of Su Yu. The skin on its body was neat and clean, without any injuries. There were only traces left behind, indicating that the attack just now had caused quite a bit of damage. As expected, the dark red eyes of the stone statue were no longer indifferent. There was only ferocity and murderous intent. "You could die now." The stone statue lifted its foot and stomped on the ground fiercely. As a result, the entire arena collapsed in an instant. The stone statue jumped into the air, then turned into a beam of red light and pressed down on Su Yu from above. While it was still in midair, Su Yu felt as if Mount Tai was pressing down on him. It was as if his whole body was about to be torn apart. The stone statue had used the power of a great saint to suppress Su Yu with absolute strength. Chapter 29:56. Since you don't follow the rules, don't blame me. Su Yu's eyes were cold. The stoneman judge below the stage sneered. "What else can you do in the Stone Man Palace?" The stoneman didn't care. No matter how dissatisfied Suyu was, he had to admit defeat. Suyu didn't even look at him, let alone the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao above him. He clenched his fist, and the real, absolute heaven sword flew out of the storage device. At that moment, the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao was already bearing down on him. Its eyes were fierce. "Human, go to hell." The pressure of a great saint was completely released. Suyu was expressionless. He just gently held the hilt and slowly pulled out the absolute heaven sword. The body of the absolute heaven sword trembled in resistance, more intensely than ever before, because the Prince Xiaoyao it was most willing to acknowledge was right in front of it. Fortunately, there were remnants of the resentment of the two great saints in the absolute heaven sword. With their help, Suyu could barely stabilize the sword. "It's you who should die." Clang! The absolute heaven sword was unsheathed. Suddenly, the world turned dark, and the sun and moon lost their light. The surrounding area felt the restlessness of the atmosphere, especially the path energy, which gathered at the place where the absolute heaven sword appeared at an amazing speed. Because the condensed path energy was so thick, the friction between the path energy created sparks. Countless sparks gathered together and formed a curtain of fire that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, illuminating the earth in a deep red. Many people raised their heads, only thinking that the heavens were being ignited, making them bow down in worship, feeling endless reverence. This was the case in the outside world, let alone the Stone Man Palace. As soon as the absolute heaven sword appeared, the whole Stone Man Palace, with Suyu at the center, was burning, forcing the stoneman and the sinful girl to retreat. The burning fire blocked their sight and their probing souls, making it impossible to see what was happening inside. They could only see the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao smashing down with the power to destroy the sky. Then there was an earth-shattering sound. The arena, which had already been shattered, completely shattered. Even Stone Man Hall trembled violently. The sinful girl had a bad feeling and said, "Everyone in the Cauldron, withdraw from the Stone Man Palace." She could see that Suyu was about to go all out, and once he did, the small Stone Man Palace would not be able to withstand it. The stone judge was able to keep his composure. He looked up at the faintly discernible patterns on the wall and calmly said, "Don't worry. If the Stone Golem Hall was so easily destroyed, then it wouldn't be called the Stone Golem Hall." The Stone Golem Hall had been carefully designed. Even the stronger great saints wouldn't be able to destroy it. Even the stone statue of Xiaoyao, Son of Heaven, did not have this ability, let alone a mere human. The sinful lady did not listen to him. She was the only one who understood Suyu's true combat power. She immediately led all the members of the Cauldron away from the Stone Man Palace. The Golem Judge scoffed at this. Bang! Suddenly, a muffled sound and a miserable groan came from the flames that filled the sky. Immediately after, a tangible palm flew out from the flames, almost brushing past the stone judge's body as it flew out. His palm hit the wall and immediately created a hole in it. The so-called protective pattern was directly destroyed, and it did not produce any protective effect. The stoneman judge's face stiffened. His back was drenched in cold sweat. When he looked at the center of the flames, there was a hint of fear in his eyes. If he was not mistaken, the palm that flew out was not the human, but the stone statue of Xiaoyao, Son of Heaven. But how is that possible? The cultivation of the stone statue of Xiaoyao, Son of Heaven, had reached the level of a great saint. Even the strongest ancient saint would not be able to harm it. Dong! Suddenly, a series of afterimages flew out from the flames and scattered in all directions. Some of them went in the direction of the stone judge. This time, he was not so lucky. He was hit by one of the fragments of the stone statue. Bang! In an instant, the fragments of the stone statue were like the sharpest blades, piercing through his body and leaving a bloody hole. He was also pushed by a powerful force and slammed into the wall. Crack! A large area of cracks appeared on the body of the stone judge. Traces of black liquid flowed out from the cracks. It was the blood of the stone statue's heart. It would only flow out when the stone judge was seriously injured. After the stone judge luckily escaped, he looked at the sea of flames in fear and immediately ran out of the stone statue palace, not daring to stay any longer. As soon as he left the stone statue palace, he heard a loud rumbling sound behind him. He turned his head and saw that the stone statue palace had collapsed. Apart from the center of the arena, everything else was buried. The flames in the center of the arena gradually weakened. The stoneman judge's heart skipped a beat. He stared at the fire without blinking. A blurry silhouette appeared in front of him. That figure was not the stone statue of Xiao Yao, son of heaven, but Su Yu. As for the stone statue of Xiao Yao, son of heaven, all that was left was its chest, which Su Yu had stepped on. The rest of its body had been destroyed. At this point, the battle was over. Su Yu slowly sheathed his sword and looked at the stone judge. He said lightly, "What are you waiting for? Come and judge the winner." The stone judge finally came back to his senses. He swallowed hard and looked at Su Yu with fear in his eyes. What kind of terrifying strength did this young human have? Good. The stone judge walked over and looked at the stone statue of Xiao Yao, son of heaven. His scalp went numb, and he did not dare show any disrespect in his eyes. "It is your victory," the stone judge said immediately. In fact, was there even need to judge? Su Yu was unharmed, but the stone statue of Xiao Yao, son of heaven, was destroyed. Su Yu nodded slightly. "Then give it to me." All 3 rounds of tests had been successful. The tripod had successfully been promoted to a great family and should have received a seal. However, the stone judge hesitated and said awkwardly, I don't have a seal anymore." Su Yu narrowed his eyes and walked slowly toward him. "Are you trying to tell me that we risked our lives to pass the 3 rounds of tests, but in the end, you don't have the seal of a great family?" The stone judge's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He hurriedly said, The seal has been given to someone else in advance." This was why the test of the stone statue palace was so difficult, and why it was so malicious that it did not allow people to pass. Because the seal had been sold to other forces, there were no extra seals to give to those who passed. Everything had been going smoothly. With the current level of difficulty, no one was qualified to pass the test. However, who knew that a ferocious Su Yu would appear out of nowhere and even crush the stone statue of Xiao Yao, son of heaven? Given it to someone else in advance? "Fine, I will report this matter to the Hall of Heaven," Su Yu said coldly. The Hall of Heaven was also an organization for the descendants of the Holy Mountain Heaven. The difference was that the Hall of Heaven was directly connected to the Holy Mountain Heaven. Anything that happened in the 9-star civilization would be reported to the Heaven by the Hall of Heaven. Moreover, there were countless powerful people in the Hall of Heaven who were in charge of the various stone statue palaces. As a stone judge, he dared to sell the seal to someone else for personal gain. Chapter 29:57. "Wait," the stoneman quickly said. "Give me a little more time. I'll think of another way." Su Yu shook his head. "Why should I believe you?" He could not trust any of the descendants of the emperor, let alone this stoneman with ulterior motives. "Then what will make you believe me?" the stoneman anxiously asked, stomping his feet. Once he reported this to the emperor's palace, he would not be punished with death, because the punishment would be a living hell. Perhaps it would be banished to the most terrifying place in the sacred mountain, the Yellow Springs. There was no time there. Once he entered, he would become a grain of sand in the Yellow Springs, lying there forever. He could not speak, move, or train. He could only lie there for eternity, experiencing the most ruthless torture of time. He could not die even if he wanted to. Countless descendants of the emperor would rather die than enter the Yellow Springs if they knew they were going to be punished like this. So he was slightly surprised. He was just threatening, but the stoneman's degree of fear was beyond his expectations. Even if he were to kill him, he might not be this afraid. He rolled his eyes and said, "Then tell me, how do you think of a way?" The stoneman was quick-witted and said, "I only gave you this month's seal. The next month's seal has yet to be delivered. As soon as the emperor's palace delivers it, I will give it to you immediately. I swear on the bloodline of the descendants of the emperor that I am not lying." Su Yu's eyes flickered. Every Stoneman palace only had one quota every month, so what the Stoneman said was not entirely a lie. However, it was the Stoneman's own fault. Why should Suyu bear the responsibility? My time is precious, and I have no time to delay, Suyu said coldly. The Stoneman quickly said, "How about this as compensation? While you wait, I will give you a piece of land." How about that? Suyu's eyes lit up. His favorite territory was, of course, the famed Sword Saint clan. However, it was being eyed by many and was not easily occupied. The Cauldron was indeed lacking a temporary territory. "Do you have the ability to divide the territory?" Suyu questioned. The Stoneman said proudly, "Of course. Within this realm, who would dare to disrespect me?" The so-called realm was the concept of territorial division in the Nine-Star Civilization. The Nine-Star Civilization was divided into 10 days, and each day was governed by an emperor. Every day, there were 24 caves, and each cave contained 100 realms. At the moment, Suyu was in an inconspicuous small realm in the heaven under the direct jurisdiction of Heavenly Prince Mirrorflower. As the only golem palace in this realm, the golem judge's status was quite high. Even if they forcibly divided a part of the territories of other forces, those forces could only be angry and not dare to say anything. "Where do you plan to settle us?" Suyu asked. Golem Palace took out the map of the realm and pointed to the most central position. "This is the place with the most Dao Qi in the Cloud Wilderness. There's a force that has just been exterminated and its territory is empty. Why don't you go and take it over?" Suyu fixed his gaze on it. The place was called Sangtia Mountain. The map showed that there were 78 aristocratic families and 3 sacred clans near Sangtian Mountain. One of them was the sacred clan that Qing Mu belonged to, and it was quite powerful. As for the other 2 sacred clans, they were even stronger. These forces occupied the best area of the Sangtian Mountain, and the exterminated aristocratic family was located at the mountainside. The Dao Qi was quite abundant, and it could be considered a rather good place. "Why is it empty?" Suyu's eyes lit up. In the Nine-Star Civilization, every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. Any place with spiritual energy had been occupied. Why was this empty place not occupied by other forces? The golem judge shook his head. "I'm not sure, but this is the best place I can find for you. If you want a better place, you will have to wait for a long time, and you may not get it." After thinking for a while, Suyu nodded slowly. "Well, I'll believe you this time, but you have to hand over the seal to me in a month at most. Otherwise, you know the consequences better than I do." Of course. Seeing that Suyu had finally relented, the golem judge felt as if he had just passed by the gates of hell. Fortunately, he had encountered a new force with no background, and he could use a good place to deal with it. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to explain. Having survived the disaster, he immediately rebuilt the Golem Palace. Suyu led the members of the Cauldron to Sangtian Mountain. As soon as he left the city, Suyu stopped and said lightly, "You have been following me for a while. How long do you plan to follow me?" In the city, a young man with wood patterns all over his body walked out sneakily. It was Qing Mu from the Saint clan. With a hint of fear on his face, he carefully approached Suyu and bowed. "Greetings, Senior Su." Suyu stared at him calmly. "Didn't you want to take revenge on me just now? I don't deserve to be called a senior." Hearing this, Qing Mu's face trembled. He hurriedly said, "I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Please forgive me if I have offended you." As he spoke, he ruthlessly slapped himself twice. Suyu was not in the mood to argue with Qing Mu, so he said, "Speak quickly." Qing Mu hurriedly said, "Senior, I am willing to lead the way to the Hidden Sky Mountain. I'm not blind. I can walk on my own," Suyu said with a frown. Qing Mu said, "Senior, you must not know that the Hidden Sky Mountain is dangerous. Not long ago, a great family was destroyed." Suyu's frown eased. Was the great family that he mentioned the one that had been destroyed? Why was it destroyed? Suyu asked thoughtfully. Qing Mu hurriedly said, "It is said that 9 ancient ferocious beasts massacred the great family in one night." 9 ancient ferocious beasts? Suyu's eyes narrowed. Why did it sound so familiar? As far as he knew, There was only one person who owned 9 ancient ferocious beasts, Gutaishu. This guy is really famous. So you could not help but be surprised. If he had any enemies from Jojo until now, Gutaishu should be the only one. His luck was not particularly strong, but his life was really tough. The collapse of an 8-star civilization, such a mighty catastrophe, and he did not die in it? It seems that the 9-star civilization is not that big. It is so easy to meet an old friend, so you murmured thoughtfully. Life in the cloud desolate territory will not be too boring. Qing Mu's face was full of joy. He said, I am willing to lead the way for you. The reason for the 180-degree change in his attitude was simple. Su Yu was strong enough to threaten the Holy Clan. How could Qing Mu dare to be his enemy? Su Yu stood still, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He said, It is too late. Let's get rid of the Netherworld King first. Its leader had provoked him again and again, and even threatened to take revenge on Su Yu. Such a disaster should be eliminated as soon as possible. Qing Mu's face froze. He said, Senior, I am afraid you will not meet them. Chapter 2958. What's the reason? Su Yu did not want to be surrounded by the Underworld King's force. That force was not very strong, but most of its members were strong Heavenly Law Masters. If they attacked the Cauldron when Su Yu was not there, it would undoubtedly pose a great threat to the members of the Cauldron. Therefore, it was better to nip this threat in the bud as soon as possible. Qing Mu said hurriedly, The Underworld King is lucky. As soon as they left the Stone Man Palace, they received an order from the vassal Saint Clan to go to a place called the Jingshin Ancient Forest as soon as possible. I heard that a fossil was dug out there. He secretly clicked his tongue. The Underworld King was indeed lucky. Originally, the Underworld King had reported to the Saint Clan that he had failed the test, but the Saint Clan did not blame him. Instead, they ordered them to go to a nearby place to investigate the situation. It turned out that at the border of the Cloud Desolate Territory and a nearby Whitebone Territory, someone had dug out a prehistoric fossil. Therefore, the Saint Clan that the Underworld King was affiliated with had ordered the Underworld King to go and investigate the situation. Without this order, the Underworld King would probably have been destroyed. Just the thought of Su Yu destroying the stone statue of the great Saint Emperor, Xiaoyao, made Qing Mu shudder. Fossil? Su Yu asked thoughtfully. Qing Mu blinked. Senior, don't you know about fossils? Su Yu was in a 9-star civilization, but he did not know what a fossil was. Wasn't this too far-fetched? Speak clearly, Su Yu said. Qing Mu did not dare to hesitate. The so-called fossil is a kind of energy crystal deposited in the depths of a 9-star civilization. The energy inside is enormous. Su Yu knew nothing about it, and he did not know how enormous it was. For example, to what extent is the energy? Su Yu asked casually. He was not interested. Energy crystals were not unfamiliar. Some civilizations even used crystals that contained special energy as currency. There was nothing strange about it. The fossils that the Saint Clan valued were probably similar, except that the energy was slightly higher. Sir, there is something you do not know, Qing Mu said. It is said that the energy is the core of the 9-star civilization. Once it is emptied, the 9-star civilization will fall into a dead state. First, the spirit energy will dry up, and the mountains will die. Then, all kinds of spiritual creatures will be on the verge of extinction. Finally, the civilization will not survive and become a dead place. Su Yu's heart skipped a beat. Weren't that the countless abandoned civilizations in the starry sky? Those civilizations were once 9-star civilizations, but every time they reached a certain stage, they would become a land of death. Su Yu had always thought it was similar to the destruction of an 8-star civilization. Only now did he understand that it was the 9-star civilization that had overexploited, causing the civilization to be on the verge of extinction. For countless eras, the Nightmare Crossing beings were like blood-sucking bugs, sucking up the resources of one civilization after another. Then, they would constantly change to a new civilization, which was why there were so many decadent worlds in the outside world. Su Yu was a little confused, and said, If we excavate the ores like this, What should we do after the 9-star civilization is squeezed dry? Greenwood laughed. Senior, you're worrying too much. Whenever a civilization is on the verge of collapse, a new civilization will be born to provide for our esteemed 9-star civilizations to migrate and continue to thrive. Upon hearing this, Suyu shook his head slightly. This idea was not advisable. This was similar to the idea that if the sky collapsed, there would be a tall person to hold it up. They both pushed the responsibility to the capable person and enjoyed the moment with peace of mind. How are you so sure that a new civilization will be born? Suyu asked meaningfully. It was unknown where those civilizations came from. It was unimaginable how much energy was needed to create such a huge 9-star civilization. Who would provide such energy? How could one hand one's fate to an unknown existence? Greenwood scratched his head. How would we know? Anyway, it has always been like this, and there has never been an accident. Suyu shook his head and said, Do you know where the fossil is? He was a little interested in the fossil. Greenwood said cheerfully, I have also received instructions from my family. He took out a round plate on which was a moving map of the cloud wilderness. An orange light spot was shining on it. This is the place. Suyu looked over and could not help but be surprised. What a coincidence! This location was exactly where the great sickle of 10,000 tribulations was. Could Mo Hung have brought the great sickle of 10,000 tribulations here? Suyu thought for a moment and said, Sinful girl, take the cauldron to the Tsantia mountain first, but don't go to that territory. Find a nearby place to hide temporarily and wait for my return. All right. The sinful girl nodded. Gu Taishu was likely to appear in that territory, and there was no one in the cauldron who could compete with Gu Taishu. Lead the way, he said to Greenwood. Greenwood was happy to do so and immediately led the way. As he walked, he took out a flying doctrine artifact and said, Senior, please board. Suyu took a look and found that it was a mountain-shaped doctrine artifact. What is it? Suyu asked. Greenwood said, A flying doctrine artifact unique to the cloud wilderness. It is extremely fast, comparable to space teleportation. It will take at most 2 days to reach the destination. 2 days? Suyu said, stroking his chin. Both of you Saint clans know about this, so there is no reason for the other forces not to know. In 2 days, someone will have already gotten to it. Greenwood said helplessly, That can't be helped. We are far away, and it is likely that those who receive the news first, or those who are near the fossil, will benefit from it. Suyu said, What I mean is we can also shorten the time. Greenwood was startled, and his face was bitter. Senior, please don't make things difficult for me. This flying doctrine artifact is already the best in the cloud wilderness. I can't do anything about it, no matter how good it is. He was a little depressed. This senior probably didn't know how far the destination was from here. Even a great saint would need at least 3 days to reach it. Even if Suyu had the strength of a great saint, 3 days was inevitable. 2 days was already the limit, and Suyu was still not satisfied. I know the space domain. Why bother with a doctrine artifact? Suyu said expressionlessly as he formed the space domain around him. Perhaps in the 8-star civilizations, the space domain was rare, but in the 9-star civilizations, there should be some. Otherwise, the flying treasure that Greenwood had just taken out had a space domain level that was very close to the origin level. It must have been made by someone who had mastered the origin level space domain. Senior, you are an origin level space domain master? Greenwood was dumbfounded. Senior, are you from the Space Saint clan? Indeed, the 9-star civilizations had a race that specialized in the space domain. Chapter 2959. The Space Master was a creature sent by Emperor Xiaoyao to the 8-star civilization to guard the place. His origin was still a secret. Most likely, he had something to do with the so-called Space Saint clan. Sort of, Suyu said calmly. Part of his primordial space realm was successfully cultivated by the bloodline power of the Space Dominator. It would not be wrong to say that he had something to do with the Space Saint clan. Gulp! Qingmu swallowed hard, his eyes filled with fear. The Space Saint clan was the strongest clan in the cave, ruling over 100 territories, including the Cloud Desolate territory. He did not expect Suyu to come from such a clan. No wonder he had the guts to lead a group of disorderly people to establish a great clan. Perhaps he was a member of the same clan, just like himself, and wanted to establish his own clan. But the other party's background was more than 100 times greater than his. Elder, your cultivation and identity are things that I can only hope to achieve in this lifetime. Qingmu's respect grew, so you did not bother to explain. Cut the crap, lead the way. Qingmu immediately pointed in a certain direction and said, it's trillions of miles away from here. The Yuan realm space around Suyu flickered, and he disappeared with Qingmu. As for the sinful lady, she led the tripod's forces to the Sangtian mountain. Somewhere in the cave, a group of white-robed masters of the Tao of the heavens stood respectfully in a magnificent palace that stood atop a mountain. There were many of them, and they filled the sky above the hall. There were at least 100,000 of them. They all stood solemnly with their hands clasped behind their backs, looking up at the sky as if they were waiting for something. After a moment of silence, a silvery bell-like sound came from the sky. A beast carriage pulled by a snow-white, demonic beast sped over. The crowd was excited. They knelt down on one knee and shouted loudly. The branch of the Myriad Cave Heavenly Law Palace pays its respects to the Grand Master. It turned out that this place was just a branch of the Myriad Cave Heavenly Law Palace. The carriage stopped, and a lovely 14-year-old girl dressed in a snow-white coat walked out leisurely from inside. She was the Grand Master of the Heavenly Law Palace, Bai Shui. The sun, moon, and stars faintly surrounded her. It was not an illusion, but a natural manifestation of her domain. To achieve such a level, one's cultivation had to be at least a great saint. Not bad. Ever since the Sword Sacred Clan had seized 10% of the primordial energy, Bai Shui had finally broken through to the great sage level after years of accumulation, becoming the only great sage in the history of the Temple of Heaven. As long as she was willing, she could lead the Temple of Heaven to conduct a higher level appraisal and promote the Temple of Heaven to a sacred clan. However, she had other more important things to do, so she didn't have time to advance. Please rise, Bai Shui said. The law masters of the branch palaces rose to their feet and looked at the shopkeeper, who looked like a young girl with awe. Today, I have come to the branch palace for no other reason. Bai Shui said slowly. A few days ago, the Son of Heaven Palace sent a message to the Temple of Heaven, asking us to investigate the large number of creatures that have suddenly entered the Temple of Heaven. This made Bai Shui frown. Actually, she didn't need to ask to know who did it. Who else could it be other than Suyu, who had taken advantage of her and stolen the great seal of the Heavenly Law Palace, as well as the stone statue seal? This guy deserves to be cut into pieces, but he's so tough. Bai Shui muttered. She had once thought that Suyu had died in the Black Abyss near the Sacred Sword Clan. Unexpectedly, a year later, she received news that a large number of unknown people had successfully entered the 9-star civilization using the official documents approved by the Temple of Heaven. She was happy and annoyed at the same time. You actually made 1 trillion official documents. You were really impolite. Bai Shui's heart ached. The stone statue seal had most likely been destroyed, right? What was more distressing was that the old guys in the Temple of Heaven seemed to have realized that she had lost the Great Seal. They had even interrogated her before, but she had cleverly changed the subject. Now, she was trying to find a way to recover the Great Seal and the seal. The most effective way to find them was, of course, to find that be *starred. We will obey the orders of the Temple Master. The 100,000 Heavenly Law Masters shouted in unison. The scene was spectacular. They quietly waited for Bai Shui's further instructions. Since they were looking for someone, they should at least provide the person's appearance and characteristics. Bai Shui was also in a difficult position. She had spent a lot of time with Suyu, but Suyu had always been wearing a mask, so she couldn't see his face at all. Even now, she couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. She could only tell from a voice that it seemed to be a man. This person's identity is unknown, so it won't be easy to find him. But since he has led a large number of living creatures to the cave of 10,000 heavenly law, he must have established some forces. Spread out and search the 100 territories. Pay attention to the new forces that have appeared. The Heaven Law Masters nodded. Under Bai Shui's command, they were divided into 100 teams, each responsible for searching one territory. When everything was done, the Temple Master said meaningfully, "Grand Temple Master, to tell you the truth, our Temple Master has recently received reliable news that a fossil was found at the border of the Cloud Desolate Territory and the White Bone Territory." Hearing that, Bai Shui raised her eyebrows and gritted her teeth. A bunch of greedy things. Even now, they still don't repent. Have they forgotten where those abandoned 9-star civilizations came from? Any ambitious person knew that fossils were the foundation of a civilization and should never be destroyed. Otherwise, civilizations would wither away sooner or later. But they couldn't stop those who were blinded by greed. They kept searching for fossils and used the power within to improve themselves. Humans die in pursuit of wealth, and birds die in pursuit of food. For many years, the forces searching for fossils have never stopped. The Temple Master was worried. If the top few sacred clans don't take the lead, how will the forces below them know their place? Bai Shui was even angrier at the mention of this. Excavating fossils was a good start for the top forces. To ensure that their forces remained at the top, those forces spared no effort in excavating fossils. If they were still digging, how would the forces below them know their place? Grand Temple Master, it's best that we don't interfere. The sacred clans in the Cave of 10,000 Heavenly Law are all ready to interfere. We can't stop them, the Temple Master suggested. Bai Shui snorted. Since I'm here, I won't let them do as they please. Grand Temple Master, you've just entered the Great Saint level. I'm afraid you shouldn't make them your enemy, the Temple Master said worriedly. There were many of them, and they were all veteran Great Saints. How could Bai Shui fight them? Bai Shui smiled slyly. I don't have to fight them head-on. All right, let me know if there's any news. I'll make a move first. Bai Shui immediately flew to the spot where the fossil had appeared. A day later, at the border of the Cloud Desolate Territory, Su Yu and Qing Mu tore through the space in front of a blazing mountain. Qing Mu was shocked. Senior's Yuan realm has already been cultivated to the late stage, right? They had arrived here in just one day. Chapter 2960. Su Yu replied calmly, more or less. His Yuan realm had been trained to its peak and could not go any further. If he went any further, he would have the legendary power that could rival that of the Holy Mountain's emperor. Is that the mountain where the fossils appeared? Su Yu looked at the mountains in front of him. One of the mountains was particularly eye-catching. It was blood-red all over, as if it had been splashed with a layer of divine blood. It gave off an eerie feeling. Qing Mu followed Su Yu's gaze and nodded slightly. Yes, when the fossils appear, there will be a blood disaster. He paused for a moment, then said, but with your strength, you will definitely be able to survive. Blood disaster? What do you mean? Su Yu also felt that the mountain was ominous. Qing Mu thought for a moment, his eyes filled with confusion. I don't know if you believe in the so-called unseen. In fact, at Qing Mu's level and status, he should have long understood that the so-called unseen was, in fact, some more powerful living beings. Su Yu had felt this even more clearly after he had walked step by step from the dust-like Xinhua Island to where he was today. Every time he thought he had encountered the will of the heavens, the ruler of the unseen world. But in the end, those were just powerful living beings beyond his understanding. Go on, Su Yu said calmly. Qing Mu said, every time a fossil appears, it is accompanied by a certain amount of death. It is really as if it has long been predestined. There has never been an exception. Even the smallest fossils can cause a certain amount of death, and there are all kinds of ways of death and injury. Either they fight each other and cause rivers of blood, or they attract natural disasters, or some dangerous things appear, and so on and so forth. There are many possibilities. Su Yu's eyes flickered slightly. A natural disaster? He wondered if the natural disaster that Qing Mu mentioned was the one that he had thought of. However, although it is full of danger, many forces still come to fight for it, because the benefits are too great. Qing Mu's eyes were filled with desire. The power contained in those fossils is so terrifying that it's said that even an early Heavendale lord can become a great sage. In fact, there are even peak great sages who rely on those fossils to break through the final barrier and become beings comparable to the Sky Clan. Although Suyu was tempted, he restrained himself. Fossils were obviously the essence of a nine-star civilization. Digging one piece was equivalent to digging one's own grave. Anyone with a bit of rationality would understand that they should resist. "Senior, do you want to go closer and dig?" Greenwood asked. Suyu pondered it for a moment, then shook his head. "Forget it. I just want to take a look." Suyu was not willing to dig his own grave. Moreover, he could sense the aura of several great saint-level experts, even though he didn't have a clear perception. Some of them were quite terrifying. If a great sage expert had deliberately concealed himself, he wouldn't have been able to detect it. One could imagine the danger of fighting over fossils. Although he has the absolute heaven sword in hand, using it once consumes almost all of his strength. In a situation where there were so many great sage experts, it was better not to rashly participate in the fight. When he thought of this, he once again added some heavenly book characters to his body, making his black robe even more secretive, making it difficult for others to detect his identity. As for Greenwood, if he was by her side, it would be too conspicuous. "Wait here, I will go over and investigate," Suyu said. Greenwood nodded and watched Suyu go to the foot of the Blood Mountain, soon disappearing from his sight. With a thoughtful look in his eyes, he said, "If we can further befriend you, it will definitely be beneficial to our Saint Clan." Suyu arrived at the foot of the Blood Mountain. There were already several territories nearby, all of which had been occupied in advance. There were groups of at least 3 to 5 people, and at most hundreds of people. Suyu had no intention of fighting with them, so he chose a relatively quiet place to sit cross-legged and wait for the fossils to be completely born. Now he just wanted to see what a fossil was and why it could become the core of a 9-star civilization. "There is someone here, can't you see?" Suddenly, Suyu just sat down cross-legged when a cold, unfriendly voice came. Suyu looked sideways and found that not far from him, under the shade of a tree, a woman in a yellow robe was sitting. She was extremely short, and her face was covered in a yellow robe that covered her whole body, leaving only her sparkling eyes visible. "Is this owned by your family?" Suyu responded indifferently. He wasn't too close to the woman, so he didn't affect her at all. "Humph. Suit yourself. Don't regret it." The woman snorted and closed her mouth, silently cultivating. Suyu also closed his eyes and carefully sensed, only to find that the energy here was extremely rich, probably hundreds of times more than in the outside world. A day's training here was equivalent to about 100 days in the outside world. As expected of the place where the fossils are about to be born, the abundance of the energy is beyond imagination. Suyu was amazed. There were other places in the 9-star civilization where the energy was 100 times richer, but each of them had been occupied by the powerful families. Moreover, even if they occupied it, it was the core of the family, and only the enemy's clansmen were qualified to enjoy it. Now that there was a natural land here, one could imagine how precious it was. Suyu immediately sat cross-legged and opened the time realm. A day's training time was equivalent to 1,000 days' worth of training. Coupled with the hundreds of times more effective training here than in the outside world, the results of a day's training would be beyond imagination. Suyu did not hesitate to do it, and he immediately started to cultivate. Throughout the day, more and more forces arrived one after another. Among them was the Nether King. After the Nether King appeared, he looked at the strong men on the ground and couldn't help but click his tongue. He said, "I don't know when the family will arrive. We're not qualified to compete at all." There were several Saint Clan members present, so how could the Nether King compete? "My lord, look over there." Suddenly, a confidant pointed to a corner. The Nether King followed his gaze, and his pupils shrank. "Am I seeing things?" Although Suyu was masked, he didn't deliberately hide his aura. He could still recognize that this person was the leader of the Cauldron. But how is that possible? After receiving the order from his clansmen, he immediately rushed over. Suyu couldn't be one step ahead of him, could he? "My lord, he is training, should we?" The confidant made a gesture of cutting his throat. The Nether King's eyes flashed with a hint of ruthlessness. He said, "Do you still need to ask?" He gave a look, and his confidant led the two of them over. However, before they were ready to move, a small tree suddenly grew on the ground in front of them, causing them to stop in their tracks. Chapter 2961. Why are you here? The Nether King asked in disbelief. Even if Qing Mu had received the news later, he shouldn't have arrived earlier than him. Qing Mu walked out of the tree and said, "The Saint Clan has our own special methods." Hearing this, the Nether King was confused, but he didn't think too much about it. Qing Mu was different from him. He was just a subordinate of the Saint Clan, but the Nether King was a direct descendant of the Saint Clan, so it wasn't strange for him to have some special methods. "Fine, you've come the right time." The Nether King pointed at Su Yu, who was meditating in Luoyang, and said in a low voice, "Look at this person. Do you recognize him?" Greenwood turned his head to look, his eyeballs rolling as he said, "Why is it him? Why is he here?" The Nether King's eyes turned cold. "It seems like you have recognized him. We were both harmed by him. Since we've met, let's—" He looked at Su Yu fiercely, indicating that he wanted to kill Su Yu. Qing Mu hesitated. "It's just a small verbal conflict. Is there a need to kill him?" The Nether King snorted coldly. "How can it be a verbal conflict? This person's life must be taken." After hesitating for a while, Qing Mu said, "Fine, I'll help you." His hands, which were hidden in his sleeves, were secretly activating the Nirvana artifact. When the Nether King attacked, he would also attack. Of course, his target wasn't Su Yu, but the Nether King. As the saying went, it was easy to add flowers to a brocade, but difficult to provide help in a time of need. If he could help his senior in a time of need, it would be a great favor. However, I've suddenly changed my mind. The Nether King's eyes shone with cruelty. "Isn't he cultivating? Then I'll make him go berserk. That will be the best punishment." Qing Mu's eyes flickered dangerously as he asked calmly, "What do you plan to do?" The Nether King laughed coldly. "Unfortunately, I have a portion of the crazy heart powder that was bestowed upon me by the Saint Clan. Once I inhale it during my cultivation, I'll definitely encounter all kinds of obstacles during my cultivation. In the end, I'll go berserk and become a cripple." Qing Mu's face was calm, and he didn't find it strange at all. This was because he and the Netherworld King were the same kind of people. In other words, there were no good people in the 9-star civilizations. The kind ones had long been devoured by the sinister 9-star civilization, and not even their bones were left. "Sure, let me have a look," Greenwood said calmly. The Nether King chuckled. "I'll let you see a joke." He lifted his finger and opened his spatial storage device, taking out a white jade box. Who would have thought that his palm would be empty? What happened? The Nether King was stunned. He had clearly used his will to take out the insane heart powder. Why did he fail? He once again searched his space storage device with his consciousness, but what made him cry out in surprise was, "Where's my heart madness powder?" The insane heart powder in the spatial storage device had actually disappeared. He searched again in disbelief, but the result was that he couldn't find it. The heart madness powder was not a particularly precious item, but its disappearance was too bizarre. Could it be that if the transfer failed, the item would disappear from the storage device? "Brother Nether King, what's wrong?" Qing Mu asked in surprise. The Nether King looked at his palm and said, "Did you notice anything strange just now?" Qing Mu blinked his eyes and said, "No." Oh, it seemed like a gust of wind. He had indeed felt a strange gust of dark wind just now, but it had disappeared in a flash. Wind! The Nether King looked around, but did not find anything strange. "That's strange," the Nether King said in surprise. "But don't worry about it." His gaze fell on Su Yu again, and his eyes became cold. "Then let's just kill him." "All right." Qing Mu's eyes turned cold. Just as the Nether King was about to attack Su Yu, he suddenly took out a wooden dagger from his sleeve and thrust it at the Nether King's abdomen. The Nether King was caught off guard, and he would definitely be killed by the dagger. Unexpectedly, the Nether King seemed to be prepared. A shield appeared behind him, and it blocked Qing Mu's dagger. Qing Mu's expression changed, and he looked at the Nether King. The Nether King turned his head, and a faint smile appeared on his face. "Qing Mu, Do you really think I'm that easy to deceive? Ching Mu had a bad premonition, and he immediately retreated. However, just as he retreated, the Nether King's strong martial artists joined hands to cast a giant net filled with lightning, and Ching Mu was instantly trapped within it. Only then did Ching Mu realize that he had been tricked. The Nether King looked at Ching Mu, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. Your acting skills are too poor. I could tell from the beginning that there was something wrong with you. From what I remember, Ching Mu was quite arrogant. Why would he cooperate with me to kill someone? The Nether King's eyes revealed a cold smile. Furthermore, you kept asking me to cooperate with you. So, I guess that you were waiting for the best opportunity to strike. Ching Mu's expression was extremely ugly. He had wanted to help his senior, but had instead been captured by the Nether King. Nether King, if I were you, I would scram as far away as I can. Otherwise, it will be too late for regrets. The Nether King had already escaped from Su Yu's grasp. Now, he had come out of his own accord. He was really seeking death. Is that so? The Nether King looked at Su Yu, then at Ching Mu. What's wrong with you? Why are you helping this motley crew? Ching Mu shook his head and laughed. You are the motley crew. The Nether King was puzzled. He wondered if Ching Mu had lost his mind. Forget it. The Nether King stared at Su Yu and said, Kill him first. One of his trusted subordinates immediately stepped forward. His cultivation had reached the middle stage of the Heavenly Law Master, so killing Su Yu should be a piece of cake. However, just as the trusted subordinate was about to reach Su Yu, a remnant mark, invisible to the naked eye, instantly shot out and killed the trusted subordinate, turning him into dust on the spot. The sudden change startled the Nether King and the others. What happened? The Nether King was in disbelief. The one who had died was a middle-stage Heavenly Law Master who could be ranked among the top 4 Nether Kings. However, he had been killed without anyone noticing. Was this a dream? However, Su Yu opened his eyes slowly, and there was a hint of anger in them. You ran away, and I didn't even bother to look for you. I didn't expect you to come looking for me. The time domain around him stopped, and he stood up unhurriedly. The Nether King frowned, and his eyes flickered. He pointed at one of the middle-stage Heavenly Law Masters and said, You go. The latter hesitated for a moment, then braced himself and stepped forward. He exerted his flame domain, which engulfed Su Yu. Su Yu stood where he was, motionless. With a flick of his finger, the opponent's flame domain was completely destroyed. Not only that, but the middle-stage Heavenly Law Master was also blasted into dust on the spot. This time, they finally saw Su Yu attack. Chapter 2962. The Nether King sucked in a breath of cold air. Even he couldn't kill a mid-stage Heaven Dao Lord with a flick of his finger. Yet, this human before him had done it with such ease. Was there even a need to ask about his true strength? Hee, Nether King. I've already warned you to scram as soon as possible. Why didn't you listen? Ching Mu took advantage of the moment when the Netherworld King's members were distracted to break free from the giant net and escape to Su Yu's side. There was a hint of gloating in his eyes. The Nether King finally understood. No wonder Ching Mu had suddenly changed sides. For a mere human, Ching Mu had gone against him, who was also from the Hidden Sky Mountain. It turned out that Ching Mu had already discovered Su Yu's peerless battle prowess, which was why he had prostrated before him. Senior, please be magnanimous and let me off. The Nether King hurriedly pleaded. Greenwood coldly harumphed and said, Senior, you have to be careful. The Underworld King is extremely cunning. Don't look at how he's begging for mercy right now. In reality, who knows what he's planning? With the Nether King's coldness, he should know that begging for mercy was useless. Right now, he should be the same as before. On the surface, he seemed to be delaying everyone, but in reality, he was secretly using some sort of method. As expected, as soon as he finished speaking, the Nether King suddenly took out an activated Dao artifact from his sleeve and threw it on the ground. Bang! When the Doctrine artifact came into contact with the ground, it immediately emitted a shocking amount of thunder and lightning, which weaved into a giant net and enveloped Su Yu and Ching Mu. His intention was obviously to obstruct Su Yu and buy time for himself to escape. You want to keep me here? Dream on. The Nether King turned around and fled. This Dao tool was a life-saving treasure that the saints had bestowed upon him. If he were to use it in a moment of danger, then even a saint powerhouse would have to resist it for an hour. An hour was enough for him to escape without a trace. "I don't care who you are. Just wait for my revenge," the Nether King said without turning his head. His voice was filled with pride. But right at this moment, a voice rang out from behind him. "How do you plan to take revenge on me? Tell me about it." What made the Nether King's body stiffen and his legs go soft, almost causing him to fall to the ground, was that the voice had come from Su Yu. He turned his head to look behind him and was scared out of his wits. Su Yu was 30 feet behind him. As for the lightning net that could trap a great saint for half an hour, it had been completely torn apart. You." The Nether King was horrified, and he subconsciously noticed that Su Yu was holding a 5-colored halo in his hand. Under the effect of the halo, the lightning net was completely destroyed. Su Yu said calmly, "Tell me, how are you going to take revenge on me?" He stretched out his palm, and the Nether King's neck was instantly grabbed tightly. The Nether King struggled with great difficulty. His face was filled with fear, as if he had already foreseen his impending death. Greenwood silently sighed, as if he could already see the Underworld King's neck being broken. However, what startled Qing Mu was that after a long while, not only did Su Yu not kill the Netherworld King, he even put him down and said, "Do you still want to escape?" What was going on? The Nether King was stunned. He thought that he would definitely die. But why did Su Yu sound like there was still a chance of survival? "I won't run. I won't run," the Nether King said hurriedly. Su Yu said calmly, "Then lead the way and find your crazy heart powder." The Nether King was stunned. "Crazy heart powder, it has gone missing. I think it must have been swallowed by the space in the space storage device after I failed to retrieve it. Or maybe it was transferred to another place." Before he could finish his sentence, Su Yu interrupted him expressionlessly. "It didn't go missing. It was stolen." "Stolen?" The Nether King and Qing Mu blinked their eyes. The Nether King said, "Senior, you must have made a mistake. I didn't have the time to retrieve the crazy heart powder just now." Su Yu shook his head and made a grabbing motion in the air. A trace of a trajectory appeared on his palm. The trajectory was very special, and it was extremely obscure. This is the ancestral technique of retrieving objects from space. As a member of the Saint clan, Qing Mu had good eyesight, and he immediately recognized the origin of the trajectory. He was stunned for a moment, and his face gradually became confused. This ancestral technique disappeared with the extinction of the Tai House Saint clan. No one has been able to successfully cultivate it. Wait, there is one person who might be able to. Qing Mu couldn't help but think of a person. He was a legendary existence, and everyone knew him. He had a famous name, and that was the Saint Thief. It was said that there was nothing that he couldn't steal. The Nether King also understood and said in surprise, "Has the Saint Thief been here before?" Recalling that Qing Mu had just encountered a strange wind, he was even more surprised. "How is it possible? It is said that the Saint Thief will not steal anything that is not rare in the world. What is my crazy heart powder? How could the Saint Thief take a fancy to it?" So you solved the question for him. He touched his back with a slightly sullen face. The sword box on his back was still intact, but the absolute heaven sword had disappeared. "I stole your things to divert my attention," Su Yu said calmly. The Saint Thief didn't care about a bag of crazy heart powder. What he wanted was Su Yu's absolute heaven sword. When he stole the absolute heaven sword, he also stole the crazy heart powder to distract Su Yu's attention. Su Yu only now realized that his absolute heaven sword had disappeared. "The Saint Thief is really fated," Su Yu murmured. In the past, when he was fighting with Gai Tianma outside the star, the other party saw his endless ancestral techniques and thought that he was a descendant of the Saint Thief who was proficient in many ancestral techniques. Unexpectedly, not long after, the Saint Thief paid him a visit. However, Su Yu was not worried that the absolute heaven sword would be lost. That sword was not an ordinary sword, and ordinary people couldn't control it at all. In particular, there were two resentful spirits in it that had a close relationship with Su Yu, and they would not allow anyone other than him to control the absolute heaven sword. "You should have a way to find the crazy heart powder, right?" Suyu asked. The Nether King suddenly understood. He thought for a moment and said, "Yes, I have refined the crazy heart powder personally. As long as it is within 100,000 feet, I can sense its scent." 100,000 feet. Suyu's eyes flashed. Then stand still. He pushed his palm gently, and a gust of wind swept over, sweeping the Nether King away quickly. In just 2 breaths, he returned to his original place and overlapped with the residual shadow he left behind. However, his face was numb, and his eyes were lifeless. Just now, he felt as if he'd been pressed against the air and rubbed fiercely. He was almost crushed. "I have sent you around 1,000,000 miles. How is it? Did you find out that your crazy heart powder was stolen?" Suyu asked. The Nether King shook his head and came back to his senses. He quickly pointed in a direction. "It is over there." Suyu followed his gaze, and his eyes became slightly deep. "You really know how to find a place. Of all places, you chose to hide here." Chapter 2963. Why did so many forces wait patiently at the foot of the Blood Mountain, but did not dare to go up? Did they not want to take the initiative and wait in the Blood Mountain first? Obviously not. The only explanation was that the Blood Mountain was very dangerous, and they did not dare to go up. Therefore, even the great saints were waiting outside the Blood Mountain. How could Suyu not be in danger? However, he had to go, because the thing that was stolen was the absolute heaven sword. He really knows how to make trouble for me. Suyu's eyes flashed with a cold light. He waited here not only to look at the fossil, but also to wait for Embark. Ever since he came here, he had been trying to sense the location of the great sickle of 10,000 calamity, but had not found any trace of it. Embark must have thought of a way to temporarily block the great sickle of 10,000 calamity. Now, the god thief had stolen the absolute heaven sword for no reason, forcing him to leave and affecting his search for the great sickle of 10,000 calamity. "Senior, can you let me go?" The Nether King's eyes flashed. Suyu did not even look at him and said, "Of course you can, but only if you come with me to the Blood Mountain and find the god thief." "Into the Blood Mountain?" The Nether King was shocked and said, "No. Senior, please spare me. I know I was wrong." Suyu's eyes flashed. There was definitely something wrong with the Blood Mountain. "Why?" The Nether King was stunned and looked at Suyu in surprise. "Senior, don't you know that when the Blood Mountain is fossilized, it is a cursed place? Once you enter, you'll most likely die. Even if you don't die at the time, you will encounter all kinds of bizarre events and die tragically." Qingmu agreed with this point. He said solemnly, "Senior, you can't go to the Blood Mountain. Those who enter have never had a good ending since ancient times, and there is no exception. The most famous one is that there was once a 10,000 saints strong man from the Tian clan who forced his way into the Blood Mountain with his incredible cultivation." Qingmu's face was a little pale when he mentioned it. Later, he came back, but he collapsed after taking 10 steps out of the Blood Mountain. It is said that the 10,000 saint strong man's skin was intact, but his insides were all shattered, including his bones and flesh. In the end, the person who collected his corpse accidentally pierced his skin. As a result, that great sage turned into a puddle of liquid and flowed away, leaving behind only a layer of skin. Suyu's pupils constricted slightly. The one who had died was not an ancient saint or a great saint, but a strong man at the level of all saints. And the way he died was too strange. Suyu believed that his abilities were pretty good, but he knew that he would never be able to shatter a person's insides while leaving only his skin intact. From then on, no one dared to venture too deep. They all waited for the fossils to appear before fighting over them. Greenwood said seriously. The Nether King nodded repeatedly. "That's right, Senior. Until now, we still haven't figured out what exactly is inside the Blood Mountain. Those who were lucky enough to escape are also tight-lipped, as if there's some kind of taboo. Therefore, Senior, please consider carefully. The Blood Mountain is a place where you can only enter but not leave." The Nether King said. Suyu pondered for a moment and said slowly, "If that's the case, why did the god thief have the courage to break into the Blood Mountain?" The Nether King and Qingmu hesitated, clearly not understanding. Su Yu's eyes shone with wisdom. The god thief is a very cautious person. If I'm not wrong, there must be other mysteries in the Blood Mountain. He grabbed the Nether King and said, "Let's go." No, I don't want to go in. The Nether King struggled and was dragged into the Blood Mountain by Su Yu. As soon as he set foot on the Blood Mountain, Su Yu felt a wave of dizziness hit him, and he almost lost his footing. The strong men in all directions were even more alarmed. "What are you two doing? Do you want to die?" A great saint strong man who was hiding suddenly rushed out and stood at the foot of the Blood Mountain. Then, several other great saint strong men appeared and stared at Su Yu with dissatisfaction. They obviously regarded Su Yu as the one who wanted to snatch the fossils first. Su Yu turned a deaf ear to them and continued to walk up the Blood Mountain. The great saint strong men suddenly became anxious, but no one dared to set foot on the Blood Mountain for fear of being cursed by the legend. They could only watch as Su Yu climbed to the top of the Blood Mountain and stood in front of a deep pit. That deep pit was the breeding ground of the fossils. "Brat, if you dare to do anything to the fossils, we won't forgive you," a great saint strong man threatened. However, his threat was obviously useless, because no one who had entered the Blood Mountain had ever returned alive. All of them had been buried within it. What was the difference between forgiving and not forgiving? Su Yu stood at the edge of the deep pit and looked straight down. His eyes were filled with fear. This was not a pit, but the abdomen of some living creature. At a glance, the stone walls of the deep pit were all wriggling walls of flesh. Blood vessels were clearly visible, and some of them were even bleeding from the inside out. That was why the mountain had the color of a blood mountain. In the deepest part of it, a huge green round egg was beating slowly. It looked like a human womb. Could that be the womb that bred the fossils? However, this method of breeding was completely beyond expectations. It did not look like a breeding fossil. Instead, it looked like a human giving birth. Even the Nether King stared at the womb in shock. He was completely shocked by the scene in front of him. "This is unheard of," he murmured. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he would not have believed that the fossils were bred in this way. "Where is your crazy heart powder?" Su Yu glanced at the bottom of the deep pit and did not find the figure of the god thief. If there was no accident, the god thief should be hiding. The Nether King retracted his gaze and immediately sensed. After a moment, he pointed to the southwest corner of the womb. "It's there." Su Yu looked in the direction of his gaze and found that there was a sunken place there. "You step back," Su Yu said. He could deal with the god thief alone. The Nether King was overjoyed. He hurriedly retreated, preparing to leave the Blood Mountain. However, just as he ran to the mountainside of the Blood Mountain, the womb in the Blood Mountain suddenly trembled. It spat out a stream of air with residual liquid, which rushed up to the sky. Su Yu immediately dodged to the side. The stream of air flew into the air and then fell down powerlessly. Moreover, it happened to fall right towards the Nether King. The Nether King also noticed it and quickly dodged. No matter what the liquid was, it was best not to touch it. However, at the moment when he dodged, he stepped on an ancient sword that had fallen on the Blood Mountain. The ancient sword flew to the position of his chest and was inserted into the Nether King's heart. The Nether King looked at the ancient sword in his chest in disbelief and murmured, as expected, "I can't escape." Then his eyes rolled back, and he spat out blood and fell to the ground. The blood he spat out was all black blood. The ancient sword had been inserted into his heart so coincidentally, but the ancient sword had also bred some strong poison, which killed him with a single strike. Otherwise, a mere sword would not have taken his life. Su Yu saw this, and his pupils shrank slightly. Wasn't this death too strange? Chapter 2964. This scene made the great saints at the foot of the Blood Mountain shudder with fear. Such a strange and coincidental way of death was truly frightening. When they looked at Su Yu, they heaved a sigh of relief and showed a hint of pity. Some even gloated and looked forward to his misfortune. They were looking forward to when the disaster would befall Su Yu. Su Yu stared at the corpse of the Netherworld King, his heart turning cold. The Netherworld King was not weak. How could he have been killed by a sword under normal circumstances? But it was happening right in front of him. Just as Su Yu was on his guard, The residual liquid that fell from the sky suddenly fell on the Netherworld King's body. Creak! The ancient sage Underworld King's corpse was instantly melted by the residual liquid and turned into a cloud of white steam. It turned out that the most dangerous thing was the residual liquid. Suyu immediately retreated cautiously, but just as he shifted his feet, he seemed to sense something and stopped. Looking down, he saw a small emerald-green sword protruding from the ground. The tip of the sword was still glowing, and it looked like it was poisonous. Needless to say, this sword was poisonous, just like the one that killed the Netherworld King. Suyu's right foot paused in midair and slowly retracted, his face full of surprise. Fortunately, she was cautious, or she would have ended up like the Netherworld King. However, just as Suyu heaved a sigh of relief, a slight explosion suddenly sounded. Without hesitation, he leaped into the air with one foot and put up a defense around him. Not only that, but he also used the secret space technique to form a huge space collapse around him. Anything that attacked him would be devoured by the space collapse, unable to harm him. Almost at the moment when he put up his defense, the space collapse around him shook violently. Suyu fixed his eyes on it and saw that a residual liquid had fallen into the space collapse. It quickly melted through the space collapse and dripped onto the ground. Some of it even broke through the space collapse and almost shot Suyu. If he had not put up a defense in time, he would have been shot by this sudden residual liquid. Judging by the fate of the Netherworld King, it would be difficult for Suyu not to die. He looked towards the source and found that after the Netherworld King's body had melted, some of the Nirvana artifacts had not melted in time. However, under the corrosion of the residual liquid, it exploded and splashed the residual liquid. Coincidentally, the direction in which the residual liquid had splashed was Suyu. Suyu's back was drenched in cold sweat. He finally understood why even strong men of the level of all saints had died here. He clicked his tongue and carefully landed on the Blood Mountain again. Sensing the danger in this place, Suyu intended to leave. However, when he saw the holy pirate hiding in the deep pit of the Bloody Mountain, he clenched his teeth slightly. He leaped, but not only did he not leave, he jumped into the deep pit. As he descended, he could hear the whistling of the wind and the strong smell of blood. It was as if he had really entered the stomach of a living being. As he got closer and closer to the ground, he felt a strong sense of danger. It was as if Suyu had aroused the vigilance of some kind of powerful creature, which had erupted with hostility towards Suyu. Puff! All of a sudden, the uterus at the bottom spurted out another wave of residual fluid, and it flew towards Suyu. Suyu was already prepared for this, so he quickly moved aside. The residual liquid brushed past his body and shot onto the fleshy stone wall filled with blood vessels. With a sizzling sound, the blood vessels on the stone wall melted away. A large amount of blood spurted out, dripping from top to bottom, covering the entire deep pit. Suyu had nowhere to hide. His eyes flashed, and he looked at the place where the holy pirate was hiding. It was the only place with shelter. Without any hesitation, his figure flashed, and he instantly hid in the place that could shelter him from the wind and rain. Just then, the blood rain poured down. Although it did not seem to cause any danger when it fell on the ground, if it fell on a person's body, the consequences could be imagined. However, before Suyu was safe, a gust of cold wind blew behind him. Suyu displayed the ancestral technique of the Eagle clan without looking back. A sharp residual mark slashed behind him, and his eyes were even colder than before. "You made me come here, holy pirate. You'd better give me a reason not to kill you." He came here all because of the holy pirate. Clang! There was a muffled sound. It seemed that two different forces had collided. When Suyu turned his head to look, he saw a mysterious woman dressed in gray clothes. Her eyes were filled with deep surprise. Like Suyu, her whole body was covered. Only her eyes were exposed, and her true appearance was unknown. Just now, this woman pulled out a dagger and stabbed it at Suyu. As a result, the dagger was knocked away by Suyu's ancestral technique. The Eagle clan's ancestral technique. The woman's voice was as crisp as a yellow oriole. There was a sense of déjà vu in her voice. Suyu turned around, stared at her, and said, Before you die, do you have any last words to say? She should be the holy pirate, and the absolute heaven sword was most likely with her. The only thing that surprised Su Yu was that the legendary holy pirate turned out to be a woman, and a very young one at that. The gray-clothed woman's beautiful eyes turned, and she suddenly took a step back. Su Yu was already very cautious in this place. How could he not be on guard against the strange movements of the other party? Without saying anything, he covered his whole body with a layer of space collapse, and he also displayed an ancestral technique. It was an auspicious Buddha's light which enveloped him. Right at that moment, the space collapse instantly broke, and a snow-white, jade-like finger wrapped in the remnant of the ancestral technique pierced through the space collapse and pointed at Su Yu's back. Clang! The sound of metal colliding rang out. The finger attacked the Buddha's light on the surface of Su Yu's body, and it could no longer pierce through. You have both the Eagle Clan's ancestral technique and the ancient Buddha's ancestral technique. Who are you? A cold voice came from behind. Su Yu turned his head and looked over, and his eyes narrowed. He saw a beautiful woman with an indifferent face and a beautiful jade-like face, looking at Su Yu in confusion. Su Yu's body shook, and the Buddha's light burst out, shaking the woman away. He stared at the woman and said lightly, "It turns out that you are the holy pirate." When he saw the gray-clothed girl, he thought she was the holy pirate. But at this moment, it seemed that this beautiful and mature woman, whose strength was far above her, was the real holy pirate. It was just that she and the girl were in the dark, one in the light, and the other in the dark, confusing Su Yu. The absolute heaven sword should be with her. I heard that outside of the 9-star civilizations, there is a successor of mine who is proficient in many ancestral techniques. Is it you? The holy pirate stared at Su Yu with her beautiful eyes and said slowly. Su Yu was surprised. Aren't you too well informed? The battle between him and Guy Tianmo had not been long ago, and the 9-star civilizations had yet to know about it. But this woman had already heard about it? It was really unimaginable. The holy pirate took a step back and said, "It turns out to be you. Your Excellency, you have great skills. Even Guy Tianmo could die in your hands. It seems that I have stolen from the wrong person." She knew the strength of Guy Tianmo. Since he could die in the hands of Su Yu, it showed how powerful Su Yu was. Chapter 2965. Su Yu stared at the god pirate and said coldly, "So much nonsense. Are you saying your last words?" Another ancestral technique condensed in his palm, and one could vaguely see a claw mark floating up and down in the surroundings. Holy Pirate shook his head. "I only said that I stole from the wrong person. That does not mean I need to fear you." His clothes fluttered, and a layer of golden light covered the surface of his body, vaguely resembling a Buddhist robe. As his 5 fingers curled around, an extremely sharp and clear remnant mark appeared. In terms of the power of the remnant, Su Yu was even inferior to it. Moreover, the other party's cultivation had reached the great sage level. If they were to really fight, it would be difficult to say who would win and who would lose. Holy Pirate said, "I thought you were from the Sword Holy tribe, so I stole your absolute sky sword. I did not expect it to be in the hands of an outsider." As he spoke, he pulled out the absolute heaven sword from his spatial storage device. She stared at the sword, shook it, and said, "This sword is dangerous. It will only cause more trouble if it falls into your hands. It's better for our people to keep it safe." Oh, according to Holy Pirate, she was not acting alone. She had more than one partner. However, this kind of occupying someone else's belongings with a dignified reason was really disgusting. If you want to steal it, then so be it. I'll even respect you for having some skills, yet you insist on making yourself look good. So you said bluntly as he pressed down with his claw. Holy Pirate's face was still cold. He shook his head and said, "You don't know anything." As he spoke, he pointed his finger, and a long snake-shaped mark passed through space and lashed out. The two ancestral techniques collided in midair, obliterating each other silently, not causing any damage. In the end, Su Yu's ancestral technique was slightly superior. The remaining marks fell on the golden streamer on the surface of the divine thief's body, causing a ripple before vanishing. Without waiting for the holy pirate to speak, her beautiful pupils shrank as Su Yu displayed 10 ancestral techniques in a row. Every single one of them was filled with a powerful might that was not inferior to the previous one. Moreover, this was only the beginning. Su Yu's fingers did not stop. One after another, ancestral techniques were displayed between his fingers. Holy Pirate was shocked. Where did you get so many ancestral skills? The reason why she grasped 7 or 8 types of ancestral techniques was because she often robbed other people's ancestral tombs and dug up the funerary objects. However, Su Yu had mastered more than 7 or 8 of them. From the looks of it, there were at least 10 of them. When you go to hell, Guy Tianma will tell you, Su Yu said lightly. Holy Pirate calmed himself down and cast 8 ancestral skills. 4 of them were for defense, and the others were for attack. However, Su Yu then displayed the endless ancestral techniques. How could the god thief's tyrannical ancestral technique contend against them? Holy Pirate finally felt that things were a little tricky. Don't go too far. Do you want to disturb the uterus? You should have seen how dangerous it is, Saint Pirate said. It would have been better if she hadn't mentioned this matter, but now that she did, Su Yu was enraged. Then I'll have to ask you what's wrong with your brain to actually make me come here. As he spoke, his 10 fingers continuously flicked out, simultaneously releasing 10 different offensive ancestral techniques. Holy Pirate took a deep breath, and her scalp went numb. She felt that she was not facing a living creature, but a human-shaped ancestral technique casting machine. Without hesitation, Holy Pirate immediately gave up using her shallow ancestral techniques to contend against Su Yu. Instead, she held the hilt of the Absolute Heaven Sword. How powerful was the Absolute Heaven Sword? Even if it was not unsheathed, in the hands of a great saint like her, it could exert the terrible power of the Absolute Heaven Sword, which was far stronger than in the hands of Su Yu. She pressed down with the sword. All of a sudden, the seemingly dangerous remnants that Su Yu had cast were like candles in the wind, instantly extinguished. See? Don't force me to hurt you. Holy Pirate did not continue to attack, but stared at Su Yu calmly. Su Yu was calm and even stopped using the ancestral techniques. He said leisurely, "Who gave you the courage to hold onto other people's things at will?" Holy Pirate was shocked, but then she felt relieved and said, "Don't try to trick me. I know better than you what the Absolute Heaven Sword is. Except for the Holy Mountain's sun, it will not surrender to anyone. You can't control it. Is that so?" Su Yu's lips curled up slightly. All of a sudden, the Absolute Heaven Sword in Holy Pirate's hands shook violently, uncontrollably, and it fell out of Holy Pirate's hands. Before Holy Pirate could catch it again, Su Yu had already taken a step forward and grabbed the Absolute Heaven Sword. Not only did he take back the Absolute Heaven Sword, Su Yu held the sword and thrust it forward, stabbing at Holy Pirate's chest. Everything happened so suddenly that both sides were caught off guard. When Holy Pirate reacted, the sheathed Absolute Heaven Sword had already touched Holy Pirate's chest. The cassoc's golden flowing light was extinguished like a piece of paper. The Absolute Heaven Sword touched his chest mercilessly. With a miserable scream, Holy Pirate's face turned pale. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body fell heavily on the uterus. There was a bloody hole in his chest, and colorful divine blood kept flowing out from it. "Master!" The young girl behind him screamed, and immediately rushed forward to help Holy Pirate up. Her eyes were full of anxiety and resentment as she said, "Why are you so cruel? If my master wanted to hurt you, she would have done a long time ago." Su Yu held the Absolute Heaven Sword expressionlessly and said, "From your point of view, your master really didn't do anything wrong. But from my point of view, she stole my Absolute Heaven Sword and caused me to suffer the Blood Mountain's curse. Even killing her wouldn't be enough, let alone injuring her." He walked forward with the sword in his hand and said calmly, "Are you ready to die?" The young girl stood in front of Holy Pirate, and her eyes were firm. She said, "If you want to kill someone, kill me first." Su Yu's face was expressionless, and there was no pity in his eyes. Fine. He had been cultivating for so long that he didn't have much pity in his heart anymore. What he had in his heart was ruthlessness to get rid of future troubles. In particular, his cauldron had been made public, so he couldn't tolerate a strong threat like Holy Pirate. Kyra, get out of the way. Holy Pirate gritted her teeth, and her mouth was full of divine blood. She took out a black long sword and stood up. Go back and tell your uncle that something has happened. I can't go back. Master, the young girl said sadly. Holy Pirate touched her head, and his indifferent face showed a rare gentleness. Life and death are common for us. Why should we care about it? He pushed the young girl away and stuck a space charm on her body. He said, when you go back, train hard. As he spoke, he was about to activate the charm. However, with a whoosh, the charm was swept away by a space realm and fell into Suyu's palm. Holy Pirate's eyes turned cold. He said, Your Excellency, do you want to kill me? My apprentice didn't offend you. Suyu held the charm, clenched his 5 fingers, and crushed it into pieces. Chapter 2966. Undress? The girl hugged her chest and shrank back in fear. Her eyes were filled with fear, but when he touched Holy Pirate behind him, he did not dare to retreat. If they retreated, no one would be able to stop this person's murderous intent toward Holy Pirate. What do you want to do? The gray-clothed girl asked weakly. God Thief clenched his teeth and scolded. Shameless. Kyra, don't worry about me. This person is ruthless and ruthless. Your sacrifice won't change anything. The gray-clothed young lady looked at Suyu anxiously. She was afraid, yet she did not dare to retreat. She asked, Must you be so ruthless? Suyu was expressionless. How troublesome. He grasped the Absolute Heaven sword and swung it lightly. The sheathed Absolute Heaven sword drew a sword mark that was neither light nor heavy, and it streaked across the girl's body. Chila, with just the right amount of power, the girl's gray robe was completely blown away, revealing her true appearance. It was a 20-year-old girl dressed in a pink dress. Her appearance was ethereal and elegant, like a wild fairy. She was tall and slender, and her skin was as white as snow. It turned out that she was still a beautiful girl who had just grown up. However, Suyu's attention wasn't on her beauty, but on her appearance. Her cold eyes were like a melting iceberg, and they were filled with blazing sunlight and excitement. Kaya, it's really you. Suyu's voice was slightly excited, and it seemed like he was speaking incoherently. The girl hugged him even tighter and asked with tears in her eyes, What do you want? Just now, the Holy Thief had called out her name, Kaya. Hence, when Suyu called out to her, she did not react at all. Sukaya, why are you here? Suyu excitedly stepped forward, grabbed her shoulders, and asked in surprise. The young girl in front of him was none other than Sukaya, who had left without saying goodbye and gone out to gain experience. At that time, the 8-star civilization had not yet fallen to the fate of being destroyed by the Holy Mountain. Suyu was worried that Sukai had been annihilated by the Holy Mountain. Unexpectedly, not only did she not die, but she also came to a 9-star civilization and became the Holy Pirate student. It was simply unbelievable. Who are you? Sukai, pupils shrank as she struggled to free herself from him. In the 9-star civilization, she had never told anyone that her surname was Su. Even her teacher, Holy Pirate, only knew her as Kaya. Do you know how to read minds? Sukai asked. This was the only way to find out her hidden surname. Suyu smiled excitedly. I am your father, Sukai, Suyu suddenly said. If he were to announce his identity, then how could he, a woman, acknowledge Sukai as a father? How could he have the face to meet a woman as a woman? Are you my father? Sukai glared at him in anger. Don't talk nonsense. Su. Sukai. Sukai was stunned. She was sure that there were not many people in the 9-star civilizations who knew her father and knew her. For a moment, he couldn't help but believe most of it, muttering, You really know how to take advantage of others. You want to be my father? You. She cast a sidelong glance at Suyu and said, What kind of friend are you? Su. Isn't that a woman's name? Sukai's brows furrowed. Suyu coughed and changed to a woman's voice. In terms of body, I am indeed a woman. Sukai became even more suspicious. What is your relationship with my father? Are you really just friends? Suyu glared at her. What else can we be? Sukai snorted. That's not necessarily true. I heard from my mother that my father was a playboy when he was young. He was never short of women. She looked Suyu up and down. You are so mysterious. I can tell you have something going on with my father. Suyu had the urge to beat her up. How could she say that about her father? Although it was the truth, ahem. Let's not talk about that. Why are you here? Don't you know this place is dangerous? Suyu looked around again, his brows furrowed. Not only was he cursed, but Sukai was also cursed. Sukai blinked and said hesitantly, Can you let go of my master first? Really, she's a good person. I thought you were from the Sword Saint clan, and that was why those **stars stole your absolute heaven sword. I didn't expect you to be my father's friend. Can you let go of my master for my father's sake? Everything is really just a misunderstanding. So you wave his hand. Forget it. Since she is your master, I will let bygones be bygones. He wanted to have a good chat with Sukai about how she had survived all these years. So he said, This is not a good place to talk. Let's leave quickly to avoid being cursed. Sukai said hurriedly, Thank you, Aunt Ryu, but we can't leave yet. Aunt Ryu? Suyu's mouth twitched, and he asked, Why can't we leave? Sukai helped the holy pirate up and said, Let my master explain. I don't quite understand either. The holy pirate wiped the blood from the corners of his mouth. He couldn't adapt to the sudden turn of events, and he was still a little confused. The person who had almost killed her was the friend of her apprentice's father. If his friend was so powerful, how powerful was his father? Why hadn't Kai mentioned it before? She paused, looked at Suyu deeply, and said, I don't know your relationship with the Saint Mountain Emperor. Suyu said without hesitation, absolutely irreconcilable. The hatred between him and the Saint Mountain Emperor couldn't be washed away no matter how long it took. The holy pirate saw that Suyu was sincere, so he said, Then, there is no harm in telling you. She pointed at the throbbing womb. Do you know what this is? Suyu touched his chin and shook his head slightly. The rumor in the outside world said that it is a womb for breeding fossils, but now it seems that is not the case. The holy pirate nodded deeply. Yes, this is indeed not a womb for breeding fossils, but a womb for breeding. The stone fetus son of heaven. What? Suyu's heart shook fiercely, and his eyes became sharp instantly. You mean the fossil is the stone fetus son of heaven? The holy pirate shook his head. To be precise, the fossil is the stone fetus son of heaven that died in the womb. If it is successfully bred, it will be the new stone fetus son of heaven. This was the first time Suyu had heard of such a theory, and he couldn't help but feel that it was a fantasy. Since ancient times, there have been 10 stone fetus sons, so how could there be an 11th one? Moreover, everyone knew that the stone fetus son of heaven was born in the Saint Mountain. Only the mystical land of creation there could produce a stone fetus son of heaven. It is hard to believe, isn't it? But it is the truth, the holy pirate said. In the last era, the human ancestor killed 2 heavenly sons. Among them, Mirror Flower Heavenly Son was seeking reincarnation with his great magical power. But the other heavenly son had to be reborn in other ways. Suyu's pupil shrank. It went without saying who the other heavenly son was. It was the 9-tailed heavenly son.